is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Just gone 10. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the show. You are listening to and watching Swarbrick on Sunday, live here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you very well this Sunday morning. Coming up, a square has been formed around the Pritster as the Prime Minister ordered to protect his Home Secretary after a report found that she had unintentionally bullied staff. Details this morning of who that inquiry did and did not speak to, and whether the PM asked for it not to be sexed up, but to be sexed down to protect her. We'll discuss. We're out of lockdown on the 2nd, but heading back into tougher tiers. We'll have the details. Plus, the court action over cronyism. Details of how the government's procurement plans are set to be challenged by lawyers. You'll hear from one of them.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. We'll get a good idea this week of how and who is going to end up covering the cost of the coronavirus. The government has been shoveling great wads of cash out the door, in part to form a square around your jobster and to protect the economy. Whatever it takes, the Chancellor said all those months ago. And this week, Rishi Sunak will start to lay out who it is that has to start paying down the £2 trillion debt pile. There are reports this morning that suggest that tax rises are coming in the spring, with public sector pay to possibly be frozen and some budgets cut. We've already seen how foreign aid is coming down. But what about for the NHS and schools? How should coronavirus be paid for fairly? And what shouldn't be touched? Has the NHS not done enough to warrant escaping any cuts or any freezes that are to come? 0345 6060 973. If you work in the public sector, is it only fair that your pay is frozen to match the difficulties that people are suffering in the private sector? It would be unfair to have one part of the economy going gangbusters and another undermined, wouldn't it? Come to your calls in just a moment. Let's turn first to Steve Barclay, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Conservative MP for North East Cambridgeshire. Great to have you on the programme this morning, Mr Barclay. Thank you for being there for us. Give us a sense of the scale of the problem that we're facing. How bad is it? We don't seem to be able to hear you, Mr Barclay. We'll try and sort out the line to you to see if we can get you sorted so we can actually hear your answers, which would be helpful. We'll sort that out in a moment. Let's turn then to Ché Donald, who is National Vice Chair for the Police Federation of England and Wales. Thank you for being there for us, Mr Donald. Hopefully we can hear you this time. When it comes to pay freezes, the suggestion is that those in the public sector, including some of your members, may start to see their pay halted. How fair is that? Good morning.
Good morning, Tom. I think it's inherently unfair. And it smacks of austerity, if I'm brutally honest. Our members are still recovering from previous pay freezes that we've been subject to over a 10-year period. In real terms, police pay is around 18% down compared to what it should be. And considering that it's been our police officers out there in the fight against coronavirus, this just looks and feels like a smack in the face for everything that they've done to try and prevent the spread of the virus and to police the public while this has been going on.
Clearly, it's been an incredibly tough time for your members, for police officers out there. But if they're going to try and do this fairly, isn't it fair to say that the public sector should match what's happening in the private sector, or should there be a special case made for those who've been on the front line of this?
Tom, it's an emotive issue, no matter which way you look at this. I think what's really key in this is that our members have suffered. Our members have struggled. We've had police officers joining the line for food banks prior to the coronavirus outbreak. And in real terms, their money...
Police officers have been going to food banks?
Yes. And that's before coronavirus. That's from the fact that pay has been undermined during the period of austerity. So we're still trying to catch up to where we should be, and to bring forward the suggestion that we're going to have pay freezes or incremental pay freezes will actually make it far more difficult to maintain a standard of living that our members can afford. So I think this has to be struck into the context that when we look at the first 3 months of the coronavirus, assaults against police officers went up 21%. So it's been more than just policing the coronavirus. It's our members that have been targeted. It's our members that have been on the front line during protests. And to bring forward the announcement that's going to happen, I believe, on Wednesday, and to say that you're going to affect police officer pay while they've been out there policing this, contracting the virus, some officers even dying from the virus, just smacks of unfairness.
The government want to have a much better relationship with the police now. They want more people to go into the police force. They're recruiting more. Do you think that's likely to happen if pay freezes come in?
That's a hypothetical question, and that I can't effectively answer.
You don't think people are going to be put off?
Yeah, I mean, people are always going to want to join the police. That goes without saying. And without knowing the extent of what's being proposed, as in will the pay freeze affect new recruits, it's difficult to say what that impact will be. What we have seen is the government promised to uplift policing by 20,000 police officers, and we've seen a steady increase in that uplift. But if a pay freeze is going to come in and it is going to affect new recruits, that will most certainly have an impact on the government's target to increase police officer numbers by 20,000.
Ché Donald, grateful for your time. Thank you. You're the National Vice Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Let's go back to Steve Barclay, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Conservative MP for North East Cambridgeshire, and hopefully unmuted now and can give us some answers about what is coming this week. Thank you for being there again. I asked for a sense. I asked for a sense of the scale of the problem. Put it bluntly for us. How bad is it?
Well, if I just say, for example, the NHS were putting in an additional £48 billion this year on top of the extra £6 billion or so record investment that had already been agreed as part of the long-term plan. A further £6.3 billion next year, additional COVID money on top. So significant investment going in, part of our fight against COVID, but to support our public services. And it's right that we do that. The international observers have all said that is the right way to protect the economy, to have that support for individuals, businesses and our public services. But it does come at a record cost, and we've got to get the balance between supporting public services and how we afford that.
So before we come on to the measures to try and pay off that, what are your guiding principles for how this should be done? What underpin those measures?
Well, I think it really comes in three phases, Tom. The first phase was how did we support the lockdown, build the capacity in the NHS. That was what we did in response in March. The second phase has been about how we then get the skills training, we protect people where they are losing their jobs, get them back into the economy, support businesses through this period, particularly in the retail sector. So the measures such as the cuts to VAT, the business support, the loans, helping with cash flow. And then the third phase will be, once we're through the COVID crisis, then how we restore our public finances.
Yes, but you want that to be done in a fair way. The restoration of the public finances needs to be done fairly, right?
Absolutely. So it's about getting that balance right.
Yeah, so the fairness then, is the fairness question answered by having pay freezes for those people who've been on the front line of the response, for nurses, for doctors, for teachers, for police officers?
Well, we're not going to have a return to austerity. We're going to have big investment in our public services. But on the issue of pay, obviously, Tom, I can't speculate on that ahead of the spending review. The Chancellor will say more about that next Wednesday. But we do need to look at these things in the round in terms of what is happening with the wider economy, what is happening in the private sector, and make these decisions in a balanced way. But that's
so if I
something
read
the
you
Chancellor
right,
will say more about next week.
And listen, I realise you're not going to give me the exact measures right now because you're going to have to wait till Wednesday. But if I've heard you correctly, what happens in the private sector is going to be reflected in the public sector. You can't have people left jobless and unemployed in the private sector, and yet the public sector pay goes up, pay increases. Is that a fair characterisation?
Well, we need to look in the round at what is happening with the wider economy and what is happening, for example, as you say, in the private sector. We saw increasing unemployment. Furlough has helped retain the links for people with their jobs, but particularly in the hospitality retail sector. We've seen many people, particularly the young, affected by the COVID measures. So we need to look at the economy in the round, ensure that it's not just reducing the number of people that become unemployed, but also the length of time that they're unemployed. So getting the right skills package in place, which is why, for example, we're doubling the work coaches, we're tripling the traineeships, we're putting in place support for apprenticeships, and pay policy must be judged alongside that wider package of economic support.
We've already seen that the foreign aid budget is going to be cut. You talk about fairness. We could be looking at a situation come Wednesday when you're hitting those who have worked hardest and those who are hardest up. How fair is that?
Well, it's about getting through the crisis, supporting businesses, which is what we're doing. So the people that have been particularly hit in those sectors where they've borne the brunt of the COVID measures, the restrictions that have been in place, and we're lifting those as we come out of national lockdown.
But
on the
people in the
December.
public sector have borne the brunt of it too, and by the sounds of it, they're about to see their wages frozen.
As I say, I mean, I'm not going to speculate on this ahead of the SR. What I'm saying, Tom, is one looks at these things in the round. Very significant borrowing this year, further significant borrowing next year, and therefore we have to take a balanced approach, but reduce the economic scarring that we have in the interim. And the package of measures, if you look at, for example, the IMF and others have all said, the Bank of England, that the package of measures that the Chancellor has set out has reduced the level of economic scarring and therefore will enable us to recover quicker from the COVID pandemic as a result of that support, whether it's on business loans, VAT reduction for those sectors affected, whether it's the furlough scheme, the self-employed scheme. It's been a comprehensive package which stands comparison internationally with the best in the world.
Do your calculations differ if there's a no-deal Brexit?
Well, we're keen to see a deal. That's always been approached, Tom. I think it's in both sides' interests to have a deal. The proposals that the Prime Minister have set out are reasonable, in line with what the EU has offered.
It would be great to get a deal.
And so that's what we're still working towards.
It would be great to get a deal, but just to come back to the question, is there a different scenario planned for if there isn't a deal?
Well, of course, the government will respond to that if there isn't, but we're still working towards getting a deal, and that's our aim, and that's our focus, and that's what David Frost continues to discuss with Michel Barnier, and it's in both sides' interest to have a deal. So that's the scenario we're working to, but of course, we'll be nimble and we'll respond if that doesn't arise.
Let me just bring you this from Frances O'Grady, the boss of the TUC. She has this morning hinted at strike action over public sector pay freezes, saying governments only seem to recognise the true value of labour when it's withdrawn. I can't rule anything out. What would you like to say back?
Well, what I'd say is we're putting in record investment to the public services, both the NHS, but also across the piece, the support, the £1 billion additional support, for example, in our schools, 350 million targeted specifically at disadvantaged children. We put in place a comprehensive measures of support within the rail sector. So across our services, the government has stood with our public services. What you will see on Wednesday is significant further investment in our NHS. The Chancellor again today signalling a further £3 billion of investment into our NHS to deal with the backlog. So the government is standing with our public services, is funding our public services, and that is the right thing to do as we go through the pandemic.
Very finally, let me just ask you about the Home Secretary. Do you think it's possible to unintentionally be a bully?
Well, bullying is unacceptable, and the Home Secretary has apologised for that. But, sorry?
Is it? Because the Prime Minister doesn't seem to think so.
Oh, bullying is unacceptable. No, the Prime Minister has been clear on that. And what we've seen from the Home Secretary, she apologised for that. I think the report makes clear there are issues within the department, so there's been lessons to learn on both sides. But what's important is that we now move forward. Sorry, say again?
Have you seen the report?
No, I haven't seen the report, but the Prime Minister has made his decision. The Home Secretary has apologised for that. And what we now need to do is move forward, recruit the 20,000 police officers. The Home Secretary has made fantastic progress on that, with 6,000 officers already recruited. That is what she has been focused on, and we will commit further to that in the spending review next week.
But this is a Prime Minister who's willing to ride roughshod over the ministerial code. He is the ultimate, or the Prime Minister is the ultimate arbiter of it. He's willing to set aside his own independent advisor saying that there was bullying going on in a report that nobody has actually read, or nobody outside of Number 10 has read, but yet you're content that the Prime Minister has made the right decision in allowing somebody that has been called an unintentional bully to carry on. What message?
Well, as I say, I think the Home Secretary has apologised. The Prime Minister, as you say, is the arbiter.
Apologised for any upset caused.
So the Prime Minister is the arbiter of this. And I think what the Home Secretary is absolutely committed to doing is making our streets safer, to making our borders stronger. That is what she is working on. And I think there's lessons for all sides in the report. It's important everyone takes those on board.
Would you expect, just very finally on this, would you expect someone who was found to be bullying in the Treasury to lose their job?
Well, as I say, bullying is wrong, and the Prime Minister has been clear on that, and there's lessons for all parties from this. But the Home Secretary has apologised for that. The Prime Minister has accepted that apology and is now focused on delivering on the extra 20,000 officers and moving forward.
Steve Barclay, we wish you well for Wednesday. Thank you, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Conservative MP for North East Cambridgeshire. Many thanks indeed for your time this morning. So, is it fair then to potentially, and he wasn't giving anything away there, Steve Barclay, in terms of the measures that are coming, but from reading in between the lines of what he said there, marrying up what's happening in the private sector to what should be coming in the public sector means that if you're a police officer, if you're a teacher, if you're a nurse, you may well find your pay frozen over the course of the next few months and possibly years. I wonder if you think that is only fair because of what is happening in the private sector. 0345 6060 973. We'll get some more reaction from unions in a few moments' time. Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC, 20 past 10.
LBC at Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Morning to you, 10:23 is the time. We're looking at the cost of COVID as this week the Chancellor delivers his spending review. The trails all suggest that there may be some tax rises to come in the spring, but perhaps more pertinently, some public sector pay freezes. So those of you who have been on the front line of this COVID crisis, nurses, teachers, doctors, police officers, may well see your pay frozen. And what we've just heard from Steve Barclay, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, is that, well, if you look at the private sector, things are really, really tough. So it perhaps is only fair that the public sector keeps pace with the private sector. If you are a teacher, if you are a police officer or a nurse, does that wash with you? Dan's in Daventry this morning. Hi there, Dan.
Hi there, you all right, Tom?
Oh, well, sir, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts personally, from being 8 years in the private sector as a self-employed gent, I moved to the NHS last year on an apprenticeship programme. So I'm full-time on the ward and various wards in the trust not far from me. And I just think it's a bit of a kick in the teeth to all the people that haven't had a job this year, that have struggled to put food on the table for their family. And I feel we're all going to be part of this. And I think to be part of it, we need to take some of the back flack from not having a pay increase personally. I mean, if I was still self-employed now, I wouldn't have a penny to rub together.
It's really interesting you say that, Dan, because that, to me, that was not going to, I'll be honest with you, that was not the impression I thought was going to be first up this morning from a nurse working in the NHS to say, OK, we're all in this together.
We're all in this together, absolutely. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that are going to disagree with me who work in the NHS, but I've worked in the world where I've had to go and source my own income. I've worked hard. And to the 2.5 or 3 million people that haven't been entitled to anything, that are self-employed, who haven't had a penny coming in, they've had to probably try and find another way to keep a roof over their heads. I mean, my wife's also a teacher within a local school. So we've been quite okay as it goes, and everything was being sort of directed, NHS, free food and everything, but there's children in my town whose parents haven't got a penny coming in, who haven't had that sort of support. And I just feel, it's all been directed, personally, my thoughts, in the wrong places.
Well, Dan, look, that is
the least we can do.
Well, look, that is very selfless of you. If that is indeed what's going to come, to say, well, it's so bad for others who are don't have the security, arguably, of a public sector job, to be willing to take the pay freeze if one's coming. Thank you for your call. 0345 6060 973. Although I do suspect there will be plenty of people, perhaps even your own colleagues, who disagree with you. Let's speak to UNISON right now. Christina McAnea is the Assistant General Secretary of UNISON. Thank you for coming on the programme this morning. Your reaction to a possible public sector pay freeze?
Yeah, it does feel that this is a really bad time for the government to announce a pay freeze. Just as we're still in the middle of the pandemic, we're in the second wave, we're still talking about public sector workers having to step up to the plate. And let's bear in mind that this is people who've continued to work during the pandemic, as have lots of other people in shops, etc. But they are literally putting their lives at risk here, their own lives and their families' lives. And this is about, not just the NHS, but it's about people who work in care homes, people who provide care services. And care workers, as an example, have been dying at twice the rate they should have in taking everything else into account in the general population. These are people who seriously are going out every single day. Most of them, and many workers in the public sector, are on very low rates of pay, earning the minimum wage of £8.72. But this isn't something that's come in a vacuum. It's not just happening. I think people may not be aware, and perhaps have forgotten, that public sector workers have basically had 10 years of pay freezes and pay caps. So during most of the past 10 years, the pay of public sector workers has dropped below the private sector, certainly in terms of pay increases, dropped significantly. And actually the value of someone's pay, the value of a nurse's pay from 10 years ago to now is actually worth 20% less than it was 10 years ago. So
the idea then that to be fair in how this is all paid for, the public sector should keep pace with a declining private sector, you would say is massively unfair, given that the public sector didn't increase with a booming private sector when it was all going well.
Well, that's one part of it, but I think the other one is how is this going to go down in terms of morale in the public sector? And I think also there's the government.
But is it not fair just to flip that? Is it not fair to say, well, hang on a minute, all those, as Dan was telling us, all those people who don't have work, all those people who can't find any employment, who have lost their jobs from the private sector, how fair is it? How morale boosting is it to see that people who have been able to get furlough money if they've needed it, or been able to have the security of a public sector job, get a pay rise?
Well, since when has equity of misery been a good economic policy or a good employment policy for governments or indeed for employers? I can't see how holding down the pay of one sector is actually benefiting the pay of another sector. I know the money has to come from somewhere, and you look around, and our members are, also living in communities, living with people who are working in the private sector or who may be self-employed, so they see what's happening. But actually, the way the government has gone around this, by just, leaking this information, we actually don't even know what's going to come out next Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And this is the same government who, I have to tell you, over the past 9 months, as head of bargaining for UNISON, I've been sitting in rooms with government ministers, I've been sitting in rooms with employers and with government departments, as have many of my colleagues in other unions, talking to them precisely about how we get through this pandemic and how we encourage public sector workers, how do we keep people safe, how do we make services run safely. And yet this is the same government who will leak this to the media, will presumably make an announcement next Wednesday with no reference to the trade unions, with no reference to the workforce or the representatives of the workforce who've actually been working with them to get the country through this pandemic. It's outrageous.
But you have Steve Barclay has just tried to argue that much more money is going into the NHS, that they are looking at putting in more money to different parts of the NHS and the public sector. It's just clearly not going. It doesn't seem like it will go to pay. Let me just bring you this quote again from Francis O'Grady, boss of the TUC, not ruling out strike action. I wonder whether you could rule out strike action on behalf of your members.
No, of course I couldn't rule it out. One of the things we'll be doing once we know what's actually happening on Wednesday is that we'll be consulting with the TUC and with our colleagues in other unions to sort of see if there's some sort of plan we can put in place to resist this. But we'll also be consulting our members.
So in the middle of a pandemic,
members are people like Dan.
Sorry, just to interrupt, Christina. But in the middle of a pandemic, public sector workers, you say, or members of UNISON, may well go on strike on the basis that they're not getting a pay increase that absolutely nobody else is getting because the private sector has taken an absolute hammering. How fair is that?
Now, what I said, Tom, is I couldn't rule out strike action. We're a trade union. Of course, we don't rule out strike action. It's one of the few things that we've got that our members can actually do.
So they could do that. I'm only putting the hypothetical. Of course, that could be the situation, couldn't it?
Of course it could, and we've done it before.
So how fair would that situation be?
Well, it will depend on what actually comes out from the government. And how fair will it be? Well, I think if we're fighting to defend public services, I think that's good news for everyone, because public services, if you're fighting to improve what happens in public services, and one of the key ways you improve outcomes for people who depend on public services, and this is proven beyond any doubt, is you look after the workforce. If you look at what happens to patients in hospital, or you look at people who work in care homes, outcomes for those people who rely on those services get better if you look after the staff. That's just an absolute scientific fact.
Christina, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the programme. Christina McAnea, who's the Assistant General Secretary of UNISON. Money is being spent, no doubt about it. That's how we've racked up debt of £2 trillion. 16.5 billion extra is going into the defence budget, as we heard the Prime Minister announce earlier this week. We'll speak to a former Secretary of State for Defence in just a few moments' time, and your thoughts too on what you've heard about a potential public sector pay freeze. Tom Swarbrick here on LBC. 10:31 is the time. Let's get your news headlines now. Philip Chrysakos.
The Chancellor admits Christmas is not going to be normal this year, as the government confirms tougher local rules will replace the lockdown in England from next month. The Prime Minister will outline his COVID winter plan to MPs in the Commons tomorrow, including how families can meet with their loved ones over Christmas. Separately, Chancellor Rishi Sunak will announce a £3 billion one-year support package for the NHS in Wednesday's spending review. In response, Shadow Business Minister Lucy Powell is calling for clarity and a route map to allow the UK to plan through next year. 5 men from London and Kent have been arrested after police were called to an illegal rave in Essex. Police describe what happened as a clear and blatant breach of the government's COVID-19 regulations in North Weald. The weather: blustery showers across the north of the UK, heaviest and most frequent in northern Scotland, dry in central parts of England, cloudier in the south with light rain or drizzle at times, a high of 12 degrees.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
10:36 is the time. Very good morning to you. Tanya's in Camden this morning. Tom, if my pay is going to be frozen, does that mean my rent, council tax and other bills will be frozen too? Presumably, Tanya, you're asking that rhetorically because you know the answer. So much for clapping the NHS, Tom. This government in this country is pathetic. Paul in Bedford says, Tom, the bully boy union leaders will have a field day with the pay freeze. They don't care about the private sector losing their jobs and houses. The union bosses are selfish, he says. As you heard, the boss of the biggest union in the country not ruling out strike action as a possible consequence of this potential public sector pay freeze. We'll come to your calls in just a few moments. Let me first run you through the front pages of this morning's newspapers this Sunday morning. We'll start with the Mail on Sunday. Lockdown will end December the 2nd, back to 3 tiers, with some rules stricter, all shops to open, and Boris to kill off the 10 p.m. curfew. The much hated 10 p.m. curfew seems to be dying a death. Sunday Mirror, coronavirus crisis, the fright before Christmas. Boris to announce tougher tiers to dampen festive season as scientists sound warning. We'll speak to the Labour Party on this a little bit later this morning. Sunday People, I'm a celeb's sister saved my life. Giovanni Fletcher and brother Mario, Gia's brother, she came to rescue after suicide bid. On lbc.co.uk, the latest on these tiers that are going to replace lockdown as PM battles backbench rebellion. Sunday Express this morning, lockdown ultimatum. Boris Johnson faces a major showdown this week as Tory backbenchers threaten to rebel over new, tough coronavirus restrictions. The Observer story we'll come on to in much more detail a bit later. Johnson acted illegally, quotes, over jobs for top anti-COVID staff. Boris Johnson and his health secretary acted unlawfully when appointing 3 key figures, including the head of Test and Trace, Dido Harding, to posts in the fight against COVID-19. Lots of stories out about possible cronyism. We'll look at the legal aspect of that in just a moment. Sunday Telegraph, lockdown to end next week, but stricter tiers are on the way. On his way too is the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's pictured on the front page. He is due to take a sabbatical. And finally, the Sunday Times, leading on what we're talking about this morning. Prepare for tax pain next year, warns the Chancellor. Rises loom as an extra £3 billion is earmarked for the NHS. On that subject, Paul is in Kingston this morning. Hi there, Paul.
Yeah, hi there. The public sector should hang their head in shame. You've had people in the private sector who've lost businesses, family businesses, who haven't worked for months, who've got zero income, and they've had to do that. They've had to make that sacrifice so that families of police officers and health workers and public sector workers can live in a more safer environment through the lockdown. And to moan about having a pay freeze when people have suffered such sacrifices for these people is absolutely disgraceful, and they will not get any support from them.
You think teachers, you think police officers should have to hang their heads in shame?
For moaning about a pay freeze when people have lost their jobs, sacrificed their jobs so that the families of police officers and teachers can live in a safer environment. At what
stage, though, Paul, did the public sector and the private sector have parity? Because there will be plenty of people in the public sector who says, well, hang on, pay rises in the private sector have gone gangbusters, way more than it has in the public sector. Why only now is it that the two seem to be melded in this way?
Well, life isn't fair. We just suffered this lockdown.
So it is unfair.
The money.
I thought you said they should hang their heads in shame.
No, they should hang their heads in shame about moaning about a pay freeze when other people have had to sacrifice all their income to keep the families of these public sector workers safer. So they should realise that. And the money's got to be paid back.
Safer.
I mean, the people who've had to give up their livelihoods have to be supported by tax, and tax income is decreased if you don't put a pay freeze on public sector
Paul,
workers.
hang on the line. Paul, just hang on the line because I want to bring in David in quickly. David's in Uxbridge. David, do you think public sector workers should hang their heads in shame?
Oh, absolutely not, Tom. Yeah, and look, I think Paul's been caught up in this classic Tory tactic of dividing working people, and it's really quite toxic, and they always do it in times of recession, crisis and austerity.
The only people who are dividing working class people is the public sector by moaning about pay freeze. If they're worried about unifying the people, take the hit, take the sacrifice and support people who've lost their jobs.
You know, Paul, who should take the hit? The people, the crony capitalists who've got the VIP contract.
1960s schoolroom socialism. It's so boring. It's so boring.
Yeah.
Listen, the world doesn't owe anyone a living. If you want more pay, go to evening classes, study, get a better job. Right, the world doesn't owe you a living.
Hang on, Paul. We need nurses and doctors. We need police officers. You can't say if you don't like the job, go and do something else.
Yeah, but if they did something else and we didn't have enough doctors and nurses, then the pay rise you'd have to pay more, wouldn't you?
David, final word to you, David.
What I would say to working people need to be in solidarity. Public sector, private sector, against this onslaught that's coming, against job losses and pay freezes, because working people should not pay for this pandemic, and the Tories have shown which side they are with
someone's going to have to pay for it. If working people don't pay for it, I wonder who else, David, you have in mind to pay for it. But listen, thank you for your call. David Uxbridge, Paul in Kingston upon Thames, thank you both very much indeed. 10:41 is the time. Let's turn to an area where there is money being spent. As you heard the Prime Minister announce earlier in the week, £16.5 billion more going to the defence budget. So Michael Fallon joins us, former Defence Secretary, former Conservative MP for Sevenoaks. Good to see you this morning, Sir Michael. Your view of where this money is going in defence? We're told Space Command and laser weapons.
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Well, it's going on the new technologies, and that's what we need to do, because our enemies, we've got adversaries out there, they're upgrading their forces. They're spending money on cyber. They're spending money on interference with satellites, with transatlantic cables, and we need to upgrade our forces away from some of the traditional methods of fighting to be sure that we can defend properly against these new techniques.
You were pushing very hard when you were the Defence Secretary for more funding on exactly these types of things. Do you worry that it's come a bit too late as our adversaries advance in their technology?
Well, I'm delighted it's come. I got a small increase. This is a much bigger increase. But even then, that was 5 years ago. Even in the intervening 5 years, we've seen the threats to our country increase. We've seen more aggression from Russia. We've seen interference in other countries' democracies. We've seen cyber attacks. We've seen international terrorists causing death and mayhem on the continent of Western Europe. All these things have got worse. So the risk to our country has risen. So it's right that the government, even at the toughest time of the public finances, should spend money. And in defence and dealing with new technologies, you need to spend money ahead. And that's what I'm particularly pleased that this is a settlement for 4 years for defence, so they can plan ahead.
Tough thing, though, isn't it? If you're a nurse or a teacher listening to this and you're worried about a pay freeze that's coming, to hear that billions and billions are being sploshed around on building rockets that are going to take off from Scotland next year, or satellites that you're never going to see or hear of when you're struggling to pay the bills.
Well, we have to defend our country. That comes first. You can't have a successful economy. You can't have a properly funded NHS if it's being attacked by cyber from the other side of the world. So we have to spend money on defence. The pay freeze is necessary. We haven't seen the details yet, but I imagine it'll apply to the armed forces just as much as to those in nursing and the police and the civil service, and indeed, who knows, to Parliament itself.
Do you agree with the idea of cutting the foreign aid budget?
Well, I think you've got to look at all these things now. Clearly, we're spending an awful lot of money in propping up the economy, and I don't think you could say anything is particularly sacrosanct. And when we committed to spending this fixed proportion of our national wealth on overseas aid in the legislation, there was always provision in that for making an exception at a time of tough financial pressure. So there was always that option in there, and I think it's something they should certainly look at.
A question, if I may, on one of your former colleagues, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, keeping her job despite this report finding that she was unintentionally bullying staff. I wonder what you make of the Prime Minister deciding to overrule that report.
Well, I think the difficulty for all of us here, Tom, is we haven't seen the report. You haven't read the report. I haven't read the report. We've seen some kind of summary of the report, and we've had the Prime Minister's decision. And I really don't see how it's possible for any of us really to judge unless you've actually seen that report.
Well, what do you make then of Conservative MPs forming a square around the Pritzker, as the Prime Minister called it, as you say, despite not having actually seen the report themselves? They trust implicitly in the Prime Minister's judgment, do they?
This, in the end, is the Prime Minister's judgment. He has to decide who to keep in his cabinet. He has to decide who he wants to be close to him. And, I don't think you should criticise MPs necessarily for being loyal to a colleague.
Loyalty is an interesting, it can be a double-edged sword, of course. Just very finally, Sir Michael, you'll not like me for asking this, but I saw your name written down in a newspaper article the other day connecting you to the vacancy of the Chief of Staff job for the Prime Minister. Would you like to rule yourself in or out of that particular role this morning?
Very happily rule myself out. I retired from active politics at the last election. I'm very much enjoying doing other things, but also keeping up an interest in defence, which I guess is why you've kindly invited me on the show this morning.
Really good to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time. Sir Michael Fallon, former Defence Secretary, former Conservative MP for Sevenoaks, on the programme this morning. 0345 6060 973. Again, if you're in the armed forces, what they give with one hand, they may take away with another, or at least put on pause when it comes to this public sector pay freeze. And on the balance of fairness, with the private sector being hit in the way that it has, is that only fair that the public sector should feel some effects of this as well, over and above, of course, having to deal with coronavirus in the first place? Come to your calls in just a few moments. We'll hear from Labour too in the next few minutes on these new tiers proposed when lockdown ends on the 2nd of December. Tom Swarbrick here, Swarbrick on Sunday, 10:47.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, LBC.
Britain's top police officer, Dame Cressida Dick from London's Metropolitan Police, here taking your calls. What do you plan over Christmas? Not you personally, but your officers, regards if they fear that there may be 7 people in a house.
I have no intention anyway of encouraging my people to be barging through people's doors unless you've got a huge party going on. Well, then we might be knocking on the door. You need to stop
Grandma.
this.
We might look the other way.
Let's see what the rules are.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, weekday mornings from 7, LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday, with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Text here on 84850 this morning, Tom. Oh my God. The public sector should match the declining play in the private sector. That's economic stupidity writ large. Why? To get the economy moving in the right direction, we need people to spend. You can't spend what you don't have. So paying public sector workers a decent wage will help the economy, says this texter. Come to more of your thoughts on that in just a moment. I'm joined now by Lucy Powell, Shadow Business and Consumer Minister, Labour MP for Manchester Central. Good to have you on the programme this morning, Lucy. Thank you for being there for us. Let's talk lockdown first. It's going to come to an end on December the 2nd, we're told, but we're going to have stricter tiers on the way. What do you want to see in those tiers?
Well, look, I want to see a lot more clarity and a lot more urgency about giving us that clarity early on so that businesses and workers and indeed families can plan around that. We've read in the papers what is or isn't coming, but what we don't know is what are going to be the criteria for which areas go into which tiers, what are going to be the restrictions in which tiers. So it really doesn't help a bar in Manchester or a hairdresser's in Harlow or a brewery in the West Midlands plan whether they should be stocking up, brewing the beer, taking the bookings. And so this kind of blueprint for businesses is what we are crying out for. And I'm afraid we've sort of lost 2 weeks of this national lockdown, which was supposed to help reset where we were at with the pandemic. We've lost 2 weeks because of all the sort of psychodramas and infighting in Downing Street. And yet again, the government are coming at this quite late.
Well, look, the infighting in Downing Street to one side, isn't it also the case that the government had to wait to see whether the lockdown was effective before deciding what comes after it? They can't prejudge whether the measures would work.
No, they can't prejudge, but what they can be clear about in a much more transparent and open way, working with local government, with metro mayors, with businesses and others about what is it that they're looking for? What do rates need to be? What does the R rate need to be? Are hospital admissions part of that criteria? And then what measures will flow thereafter? And how do you go into a tier? How do you come out of a tier, etc.?
Yeah.
All the things that we haven't had to date, I'm afraid.
One of the conditions of coming out of lockdown was that R was below 1. And I think the Labour Party in their call for a circuit breaker some time ago talked about R needing to be below 1. If it isn't, when this lockdown ends, will Labour still support coming out of it?
Well, we'll have to see what the other measures are that they are using to determine that. I mean, the R rate here where I am in Manchester in the northwest is now below 1, but the infection rates numbers themselves are still higher than the national average. So I don't think it probably is just about the R rate. It's about the sort of direction of travel and the overall infection rates and possibly the impact on hospital admissions and things like that. But that's exactly the sort of framework that is missing that really should have been laid out quite a while ago about whether we were going to come to these decisions and how.
We'll get. I suppose we'll see more. Well, we'll have to see more details at some stage. Otherwise, no one's going to know what they're doing. But we've got a cabinet meeting happening later on today, so we wait to see the conclusions of that. Just on some of the stuff that the Chancellor is set to announce later on in the week, Lucy Powell. We've had one of the senior people at the largest union in the country, UNISON, suggest that strike action can't be ruled out if it is going to be the case that a public sector pay freeze comes in. I wonder what your response to that is.
Well, look, I think a public sector pay freeze is completely the wrong thing right now, both economically, as your listener said just before I came on air, because economically you cannot cut your way out of an economic crisis. We're not even in the recovery phase yet, but you would choke off any recovery because you're pulling out of the economy money and
but in fairness, money is being spent. Yeah, but money is being spent on public services like never before. I mean, we've never in our lifetime seen money fly out the door as quickly as this. So the money's going in.
Well, and as I was just going to say, it's not just an economic argument, but a moral argument as well about public sector pay, because this is, I mean, the word unprecedented doesn't even fit the times, does it? Because this is much more like a war era or something like that, where we've seen this pandemic really take its toll, and it would be a kick in the teeth for those frontline workers. Whether they're people who've been collecting our bins while we've all been locked up at home, people working in mortuaries, the firefighters, the public health workers, the hospital porters, who would all see their pay cut just after the most horrendous 9 months, where they've all pulled us all through, and there are still more difficult times to come. So it economically doesn't make sense, because it will make the economic crisis longer and deeper, and it will make that much worse. But it really is morally the wrong thing to do as well.
Just very finally, talking of longer and perhaps deeper hostilities, I see that one of your colleagues has today suggested that Sir Keir Starmer does not have a vendetta against Jeremy Corbyn. How would you describe the relationship between your boss and your former boss?
Well, I don't know how the relationship is, but what I do know is that Keir has said all the way through that he wanted to tackle anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. He made absolutely clear on the day that the very damning and frankly humiliating report from the EHRC was published was that he didn't want to see anyone reacting to that report, making excuses or saying that anti-Semitism had been exaggerated. And unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn then put out a statement that fell foul of that. So I think Keir's made clear...
Will he ever be able... Yeah, but will Jeremy Corbyn ever be able to say sorry enough, as he has done? He's apologised for it subsequently. Isn't that enough?
Well, he hasn't really apologised, and I think that it does start with that apology about how he reacted to the report. It's a decision for Keir and the Chief Whip about whether the whip is restored. I want to see that matter resolved, as I'm sure many other people do, but I think that resolution has to begin with an apology for getting that reaction so wrong.
Good to talk to you. Lucy Powell, thank you for coming on the programme. Shadow Business and Consumer Minister, Labour MP for Manchester Central. Brendan's in Nottingham. Morning, Brendan.
Hello there, Tom.
Hello, sir. Public sector pay freeze. Your thoughts?
Yes. I just wanted to... Can I try and balance things up a little bit? Okay. I'm a public sector worker. And I think every time the economy has gone skew with, and obviously previously it was a 2007-8 crash, the private sector workers who normally suffer more, I accept that, so just bear with me, let me finish, have obviously turned on the public sector workers. Oh, you're lucky, you got a job for life and all this sort of thing, although, believe me, that isn't the case anymore. But the thing is, this is what bosses and governments want, because it detracts attention from them. Now, can I ask, in the last 10 years, obviously, first of all, the coalition government, when they first came in, one of the things that George Osborne did was cap public sector pay. Was either a maximum of 1% or 0% increases. In that time, I got about 5 1%, 3 0%, and it was only the last couple of years, I think we got 1.5% and 2%, okay?
Well, I think you're going to, unfortunately, Brendan, you're going to have to look back on that and think that was good, because at the moment, it doesn't seem like you're going to get anything next year. Listen, thank you for your call. Apologies it was short. You can hear that we're building up to the news at 11 o'clock. And speaking of jobs, after the news at 11 o'clock, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is still in hers, despite a report saying that she unintentionally bullied people. How do you think it looks for the Prime Minister to keep her in the Cabinet?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock, the head of the TUC is criticising the government over plans for a public sector pay freeze to help cut costs during the coronavirus pandemic. Speaking ahead of the Chancellor's spending review on Wednesday, Francis O'Grady adds workers could be balloted for strike action. Christina McAnea is the Assistant General Secretary of UNISON, which represents many NHS workers. She's told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC industrial action for her members is also a possibility.
We'll be consulting with the TUC and with our colleagues in other unions to sort of see if there's some sort of plan we can put in place to resist this. But we'll also be consulting our members. I couldn't rule out strike action. We're a trade union. Of course, we don't rule out strike action.
But the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Steve Barclay, has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC the government has supported most workers through the pandemic.
We have to take a balanced approach, but reduce the economic scarring that we have in the interim. And the package of measures that the Chancellor has set out has reduced the level of economic scarring and therefore will enable us to recover quicker from the COVID pandemic.
Separately, the Chancellor confirms England will return to a stricter three-tiered system when its coronavirus lockdown ends next month. The Prime Minister will announce his COVID winter plan to MPs in the Commons tomorrow, including how families will be able to meet with loved ones over Christmas. But Rishi Sunak says we'll have to wait to hear what Boris Johnson has planned.
Frustrating as it is for all of us, Christmas is not going to be normal this year. But that said, the Prime Minister and everyone else were looking at ways to see how families can spend some time with each other over Christmas period. Obviously, that's something that we would like to do, and it's been a difficult year for all of us.
In other headlines this hour, a search for 2 crew members missing off the coast of Seaford in East Sussex has resumed this morning. A third was rescued yesterday. Their vessel put out an emergency distress beacon just before it sank. The US military have sent B-52 bombers to the Middle East in what US Central Command says is to deter aggression and to reassure allies. It comes days after the Trump administration announced a partial withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. Police say 31 people have been arrested during anti-lockdown protests across England. There were a number of demonstrations yesterday, including in Bournemouth, Liverpool and London. The Archbishop of Canterbury says he'll be taking time off next year for spiritual renewal. Lambeth Palace says Justin Welby's sabbatical, expected to last 3 months from May, will also be for study, reflection and prayer. The weather, blustery showers across the north of the UK, heaviest and most frequent in northern Scotland, dry in central parts of England, cloudier in the south with light rain or drizzle at times, a high of 12 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Philip Chrysikos.
This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. Just gone 11 o'clock. You're listening to Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC, which, of course, you can watch in full high-definition Technicolor via Global Player or YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. We're absolutely everywhere. As I say every week, the assault on your senses continues. After the news at 12, it is all ending in tears, isn't it, this lockdown? We'll be back into tougher tiers, apparently. Cabinet meeting today to work out exactly what is going to be in those tiers and then to lay out the plan on Monday. So we'll get more details of what we have already on what those tiers are going to look like and what it'll mean for you coming out of lockdown on December the 2nd. That cabinet minister, by the way, that cabinet meeting, by the way, taking place with Priti Patel in it. The Home Secretary continues in her job. Despite this report, the conclusions of which, the summary of which, the Prime Minister has made public, or at least made public to those in number 10, that suggests that she was unintentionally found to have bullied staff members. The Home Secretary has apologised for any upset caused, but there is still pressure on the Prime Minister to sack the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. Indeed, there's one paper that's reporting this morning that Priti Patel is going to go anyway. She will be axed in the reshuffle that is apparently coming in January, but rather over her competence than on her behaviour. It seems that she may well have unintentionally bullied staff members and not been very good either. 0345 6060 973 if you think you can defend Priti Patel's position and why she should remain in the Cabinet, despite this report finding that she had unintentionally bullied people, and that the report's author, this independent advisor to the Prime Minister on ministerial standards, has now quit as a result of the Prime Minister overruling him. A little bit earlier this morning, I spoke to Steve Barclay, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Conservative MP for North East Cambridgeshire, and I asked him whether he thinks it is possible to unintentionally bully someone. Do you think it's possible to unintentionally be a bully?
Well, bullying is unacceptable, and the Home Secretary has apologised for that. But, sorry?
Is it? Because the Prime Minister doesn't seem to think so.
Oh, bullying is unacceptable. No, the Prime Minister has been clear on that. And what we've seen from the Home Secretary, she apologised for that. I think the report makes clear there are issues within the department, so there's been lessons to learn on both sides. But what's important is that we now move forward. Sorry, say again?
Have you seen the report?
No, I haven't seen the report, but the Prime Minister has made his decision. The Home Secretary has apologised for that. And what we now need to do is move forward, recruit the 20,000 police officers. The Home Secretary has made fantastic progress on that, with 6,000 officers already recruited. That is what she has been focused on, and we will commit further to that in the spending review next week.
But this is a Prime Minister who's willing to ride roughshod over the ministerial code. He is the ultimate, or the Prime Minister is the ultimate arbiter of it. He's willing to set aside his own independent advisor saying that there was bullying going on in a report that nobody has actually read, or nobody outside of Number 10 has read, but yet you're content that the Prime Minister has made the right decision in allowing somebody that has been called an unintentional bully to carry on. What message?
Well, as I say, I think the Home Secretary has apologised. The Prime Minister, as you say, is the arbiter.
Apologised for any upset caused.
So the Prime Minister is the arbiter of this. And I think what the Home Secretary is absolutely committed to doing is making our streets safer, to making our borders stronger. That is what she is working on. And I think there's lessons for all sides in the report. It's important everyone takes those on board.
Would you expect, just very finally on this, would you expect someone who was found to be bullying in the Treasury to lose their job?
Well, as I say, bullying is wrong, and the Prime Minister has been clear on that, and there's lessons for all parties from this. But the Home Secretary has apologised for that. The Prime Minister has accepted that apology and is now focused on delivering on the extra 20,000 officers and moving forward.
Steve Barclay, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Conservative MP for North East Cambridgeshire, speaking to me a little bit earlier on the programme. I'm joined by Stuart Jackson, Telegraph columnist, former Conservative MP for Peterborough, former Chief of Staff to David Davis when he was Brexit Secretary, and by Lord Peter Ricketts, former Permanent Secretary to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the former National Security Advisor under David Cameron. Thank you both for being there this morning. Mr Jackson, let me start with you first. Bullying is bullying and is completely unacceptable in any context, isn't it? Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I agree with you, Tom.
Great. That means Priti Patel. I don't see then how the Prime Minister comes to the conclusion he's come to.
Well, he has to take a value judgment on the report that he read. I think it's important to realise that there has to be accountability, not just for senior ministers, but for senior civil servants as well. And you would not put someone's career and future on the line having not interviewed them or ask them in any formal setting to put their side of the story. And I'm astonished that Sir Alex Allen did not at any point interview Priti Patel. He interviewed, as I understand, other civil servants. He is a long-standing civil servant. I think the Prime Minister has taken on board all the issues, including the very positive work being done between Priti Patel as Home Secretary and the new Permanent Secretary now.
Lord Ricketts, the square that formed around the Pritster then, if I read rightly between the lines of what Mr Jackson is saying, is that the civil service were looking to undermine her.
Well, this is very worrying because the ministerial code is set up on the basis that the Prime Minister is judge and jury. And so the Prime Minister has an obligation not only to take account of the interests of his minister, but also of the people who allege this bullying. And I don't see that in this process they've had their voice heard at all. The Prime Minister has set aside the recommendations of his own independent advisor. There is no further accountability for that. The victims of this alleged bullying are left unsatisfied. And it seems to me that the system is broken because the Prime Minister hasn't acted in a dispassionate way. His message to Tory MPs makes it look as if this was a political judgment rather than a dispassionate judgment on the facts.
And the report suggests, Mr Jackson, that the Prime Minister, rather than trying to sex up the document, was trying to sex it down by asking the author of it to remove some of the more colourful language. Not that we've read the report.
Well, we don't know that's the case. That's media speculation. I think Peter Ricketts is quite right that a good relationship between cabinet ministers and their officials depends on mutual respect and trust. And that is not evinced particularly by officials refusing, countermanding the direct directions and requests of senior ministers. And I think there is evidence, and it's come out today, that did happen. The fact is that Priti Patel is tough, she's focused, she's an Asian woman, she's pro-Brexit. She's probably not the sort of person...
Why do those two things... It's interesting that you mentioned those two things. Sorry, Mr Jackson, to interrupt, but it's interesting you mentioned those two things, that she's a British Asian woman and that she's pro-Brexit. Why does that matter?
Because there is a feeling amongst a number of people, including people in the Parliamentary Conservative Party and wider Conservative Party, that there is a hardcore of people who are deeply hostile to Brexit and to the general direction of the government, and being associated, as she has been and is, with taking a tough line on that. Also taking a tough line on immigration, on policing, on crime and punishment, does not always put her on the same side philosophically and politically with senior civil servants. And it would be naive to assume that is not a key issue. I accept the civil service has to serve ministers of whatever political hue, but there is bound to be an issue of whether they can align with those views. And one other thing, Tom, this is the only department that has been criticised consistently, called not fit for purpose, and has cost many ministers over the years their jobs for various reasons.
Well, it has. I mean, in the relatively recent past, we've had the longest-serving Home Secretary for many years. Let me put this to you, Lord Ricketts. The details in the papers, and I realise this is a family show, so I'll keep it brief, but details of Johnson's thinking emerged as those who've read the report on her conduct say it recounts numerous examples of shouting, screaming and swearing. Quote, she kept telling civil servants they were effing useless. She would storm out of her office and say, why is everyone so useless? She would tell officials their work was useless. Is that bullying, or is that just frustration at ineffective work?
Well, none of us have seen this report, and it would help, I think, if the report was published so we could all see it. But from what you've read out, that sounds like bullying to me, yes. You imagine the impact on quite a junior member of staff of having a very senior person like a Secretary of State shouting and swearing at them. I mean, that would be absolutely devastating.
Were you ever shouted or sworn at as part of your career as 40 years in the civil service, Lord Ricketts? Were you ever sworn at by somebody in power?
No, I wasn't. I don't think I can ever remember a foreign secretary.
Wow, you must have been really good.
Shouting and swearing at me. I mean, there's a difference between robust, forceful ministers. I've had plenty of those. And behaviour that intimidates, that makes people feel belittled and harassed. And that, I mean, we none of us seen the report, but that seems to be what's going on here.
Is swearing a sackable offence?
I mean, well, that's for the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister, in the end, has to be accountable to Parliament for this, which is why we need to see the report. Because otherwise, this is a closed loop. The Prime Minister receives a report, he rejects the findings, and then we're all expected to think that that's okay. But I don't think it is okay for those who came forward bravely and said that they felt that they'd been bullied by a very senior minister. And by the way, this apparently was not just in the Home Office, but in a number of previous departments she served. So this looks like a pattern of behaviour. Therefore the system needs looking at again.
Stuart, I wonder if you think that kind of language, that kind of tone is becoming of somebody in such high office.
Well, come on, Tom, you worked in Downing Street. There were a few blue moments and profanities there.
There were, but I have to say, Mr. Jackson, I was never, ever sworn at or spoken to that way by anybody, including the Prime Minister, and she had the most stressful job of anybody.
Well, I work with civil servants as a special advisor, and I always took the view to kill with kindness, and I wouldn't raise my voice, and that's not my style, and never was. And indeed, my boss, David Davis, took the same view. But it is a value judgment that the Prime Minister has made, and he will be accountable to Parliament as to whether this is worthy of terminating Priti Patel's career. It is the toughest gig in government, the Home Office. She has to deal with some really big issues with Brexit coming up, big legislation, policing, crime. And I just think that on the balance of the evidence presented to him in that report, he felt that it was not appropriate to demand the resignation of the Home Secretary.
And just very finally on this, Stuart, do you think, therefore, based on what you've said previously about her ethnicity and her stance on Brexit, do you think that being from an ethnic minority and being pro-Brexit is an excuse for bullying?
No, not at all. The point I was making is there is a predisposition by some senior civil servants to assume that she should take a different view and have a different outlook because of her ethnicity and because of her gender. Now,
do we know that, though? That sounds a bit conspiracy theory, doesn't it?
No, I mean, it's not necessarily her. It's all people that espouse a strong position of Brexit, a manifesto.
But David Davis never shouted or raised his voice at his civil service. As you said, he tried to kill people with kindness. Why does Priti Patel get an excuse, get out of jail free card?
Well, it's no excuse, but it's certainly the case that what came out of that report is the civil service has been invited to review its own conduct and behaviour, and particularly at the senior level. And in terms of Philip Rutnam, Philip Rutnam came before me when I was on the Public Accounts Committee when he was a permanent Secretary of the Department for Transport. He was not a very compelling witness. And I suspect that if it's true, the reports in the media, that there were occasions where he and others directly countermanded the instructions of the Home Secretary. I think that's a very serious issue too. But that does not, I do not give her a pass in any sense to commit any acts of bullying. But I think on the balance of the evidence, as I say, the Prime Minister has made that decision and he will be accountable to Parliament perhaps next week.
Lord Ricketts, just very, very finally on this. Have you ever seen, you've been in the civil service, or you had been in the civil service a very long time. Did you ever see civil servants trying to actively undermine orders from a minister because they disagreed with the minister's views?
No, and
I think that's all the answer we're going to get, unfortunately, because the technology has let us down. But that was a very, very clear answer. Lord Ricketts, thank you very much indeed. Former Permanent Secretary to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, former National Security Advisor to David Cameron. Stuart Jackson, thank you very much indeed to you two. Telegraph columnist, former Conservative MP for Peterborough, former Chief of Staff to David Davis. Now, I must say, and I don't mean this as a slight on Mr Jackson at all, but the number of Conservative MPs who have tweeted their support for Ms Patel have provided this, as the Prime Minister described it, this square around the Pritster. There have been numerous Conservative MPs who have tweeted their support of Priti Patel, and the team at Swarbrick on Sunday rang pretty much all of them yesterday. None of them wanted to come on the radio and explain why they were so supportive of the Home Secretary. Wonder what you make of that. 0345 6060 973 84850 to text. Do you understand why the Prime Minister may have come to the decision that he's come to keep Priti Patel in her job? That, as Stuart Jackson just told us, it was, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. She was very frustrated at a lack of competence and of the excuses perhaps she was getting in the office, so she unintentionally bullied them. Have you been unintentionally bullied at work? 0345 6060 973. Your call's in just a moment. Swarbrick on Sunday, it's 11:18.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Morning to you. The Patel inquiry story not going anywhere. Front page of 3 of the newspapers this morning. The Sunday Telegraph: Patel shakes up antiquated work practices at Home Office. No misunderstanding where the Telegraph is on this one. The top ranks of the civil servants at the Home Office are to be shaken up in the wake of claims of bullying by Priti Patel, with officials asked to work some weekends and be subject to performance reviews. Now, I've never worked in the Home Office, but I'd be incredibly surprised if there weren't civil servants, very senior civil servants, who were always working weekends and always had performance reviews. That seems remarkable to me that they didn't. The Observer: officials blocked access to Patel inquiry witness. Boris Johnson's former advisor on ministerial standards was, says the paper, prevented from interviewing a key witness for his bullying inquiry into Priti Patel's behaviour. Whitehall sources have revealed that Sir Alex Allen sought to interview the former top Home Office civil servant, Sir Philip Rutnam, who made the allegations, about his dealings with Patel, but was blocked by government officials. And in the Sunday Times, they suggest that Priti Patel is going to be off anyway, rather than for her behaviour, but more for her competence, or lack thereof, the paper suggests. Boris Johnson set to axe Priti Patel as Home Secretary in his next reshuffle, amid questions in Downing Street over her competence, as it emerged that a report on her conduct found she had told civil servants that they were, bleep word, useless. Jonathan's in Finchley this morning. Hi there, Jonathan.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well,
Tom,
sir. Do you think... Go on.
Tom, all we know so far is what Sir Alex Allen's report, which has been published, says, which is she's guilty of forceful expression, including some occasions of shouting and swearing. Now, Tom, you tell me a workplace in the country where there has not occasionally been forceful expressions, including some occasions of shouting and swearing. You know, I would love to see the full report, and I think we will at some stage, and that's important. But on the evidence so far, there is no case. And I will add, Tom, that some of the people, and I've seen on social media, some of the people going for Priti Patel are intensely misogynist and also intensely anti-Semitic. Let's remember what happened to her in 2017, which you'll remember, because I think you were at 10 Downing Street then. Priti Patel went to Israel in order to achieve a humanitarian objective, which was...
No, I'm sorry, Jonathan. No. Priti Patel went to Israel on holiday, took hang on a sec, let's get it right, because you're right, I was there. She took a holiday to Israel. She took a Conservative donor with her and ended up in meetings with Israel's Prime Minister without telling anybody that it had been approved. And then when the Prime Minister asked her about those meetings, was not necessarily that forthcoming with the truth about them.
Tom, you're right. She went on her own expense on holiday to Israel in order to possibly help with DFID money.
So
Israeli
she freelanced.
Army.
Jonathan, she freelanced on British foreign policy and then wasn't truthful with the Prime Minister when she was asked questions about it. I mean, that's
Tom, she went with a humanitarian objective, which was to help Syrian wounded people with the field hospital.
The objective might have been fantastic. If the objective was necessary and the right thing to do, why not do it? Why not minute it as a government meeting?
She simply made a mistake, I believe, in not telling people what she was going to do. I don't think there was any malicious intent behind it.
I'm sure there was no. If there was no malice behind it, that's absolutely fine, Jonathan. But it is right that she lost her job over that. Why is it right that she's kept in her job now?
Saying is that there is not only misogyny behind the accusations, and I've seen them on social media, there is also a dose of anti-Semitism. But let's come back to the topic, which is she guilty of bullying? Now, unless the definition of bullying has changed, forceful expression, including some occasions of shouting and swearing, is not bullying. And I repeat...
Well, why was she asked to apologise? She hasn't done anything wrong. Why did the Prime Minister get her to apologise?
Because apparently a lot of people think that this is bullying, but forceful expression, including some occasions of shouting and swearing, is not bullying in my dictionary. If it is bullying, then we need to multiply the number of HR professionals in this country by about 250.
Well, I'm sure that they will be jumping up and down in support of that idea. Jonathan, thank you. Mick's in Ipswich this morning. Hi, Mick.
Yeah, hello. Yes, I was saying to your researcher there, it's the generalities of these reports anyway. If it had been a glowing report saying absolutely nothing was wrong, just like the Russia inquiry that we had before, it would have been published the next day. As it is, it's been set around for months, and now, even though it's out, we can't see it. And then, as I put to him, and I'll use you as the example, you imagine if you screamed, shouted, swore at the person who's putting these calls through to you as to
just imagine,
you put them through,
just imagine,
you'd be gone. I mean, yes, you might say, "Good Lord, why did you put them on?" But if you then
I'm starting to have questions about this one as well, Mick,
it wouldn't look good, would it?
No, I agree, but there are, and to an extent, high stress, high pressure jobs where people have competing or diverging opinions on various things. Then you can understand why maybe there's some colourful language used. I think let's put it like that. I don't think we are saying though that, but I don't think. No, well, hang on. Are you suggesting that that swearing is now a sackable offence?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it. A lot of it depends on who says it and who they say it to.
Okay, so Nick, so I end your call, sir. So let's hang on a sec, Mick. Let's play it out. Let's play it out. So we part our ways, Mick, and after the news headlines, I go absolutely tonto at the researcher who put the call through, shouting and swearing and screaming. Should I lose my job?
You should certainly be. Well, I think you should be in a position where you know damn well that you can't do it. That's the point. These things have to be stopped.
I think, Mick, do you know what? I think you make a very valid point, sir. Thank you for your call. We're on great speaking terms with us and the researchers. They love them. Daniel's in Walthamstow. Hi there, Daniel.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, yeah, whatever time it is here. Good afternoon. Well, good morning. Good morning. Yes. My point is that you should treat people how you want to be treated. For one. Number two, if you're in such a high-powered, high-stressful job, you should be able to do the job or don't do it. I used to work for an organisation, a huge organisation in London, and I remember starting there as a contractor, and I remember within my first week, I got pulled into a side room, and a manager just started effing and blinding at me right in my face for something I hadn't done. But he didn't try and find out what happened. He just started swearing, loudly shouting at me, and I shut that down on the spot. Now, as a contractor, you don't normally do that because they can have you at the door for any reason.
That's right.
But I realised most things in life, if you let someone get away with doing it the once, they will continue to do it. Now, once I shut that down, he was shocked, and then he gave me the chance to explain what happened. And then my manager came in, and luckily my manager backed me and told him, don't talk to his staff like that ever again, and if there's any issue, to come to him. Now, this is how you handle things.
Yeah.
You don't.
Do you think, though, Daniel, that if you'd made a complaint about the treatment that you'd been subjected to, that the process that complaint went through would have been fair and it'd be judged fairly against the evidence of the incident?
Okay, we're in the real world now. We both know when the higher up you go in an organisation, it's all about friends and who you know and who back you up and who rubs your back. Now, I've been in situations where I've had people talk to me a certain way and I've not liked it, and I've raised a complaint. And because the person was liked by the people around her, nothing was done. And this is the problem we have. The people at the same level as the person causing the problem always look at that person and say, oh, they're so nice. They've always talked to me in a good manner. I've never seen that because they're on the same level as you. They're on the same level as you. They're not going to talk to you like that. They will only talk to people they can get away with talking to you like that. And if they talk to people on the same level as that, they would not get away with it. But because they can talk to people who can't do nothing about it, they do. And that is bullying. Now, the president, has been made.
Yeah, listen, Daniel, I appreciate the call. Yeah, I appreciate the call. Sorry to cut you off, but we're going to run out of time. And I think actually there are plenty of people listening to that who will have shared a similar experience. They will have had an incident at work that they will either have tried to shut down themselves or complain to their managers about. It'd be interesting to see where it went, that particular complaint, or whether it is the case as maybe descriptive of the example that we've had over the course of the week at the higher ups in government that Boris Johnson made a political decision, didn't trust the case that his own independent advisor on ethics came to the conclusion of. He didn't trust that particular conclusion. He decided to dispense with that and him and keep, perhaps for political reasons, his Home Secretary. 0345 6060 973 is the number, 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. More of your calls in a few moments. 11:31, let's get some news headlines. Here's Philip Chryssikos.
The Chief Secretary to the Treasury has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC the government will be fair when deciding where spending cuts must be made. Steve Barclay's words come as the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, hasn't denied reports he could impose a pay cap on millions of public sector workers, except for doctors and nurses. In response, the TUC and UNISON haven't ruled out strike action by workers in the public sector. Separately, the Chancellor admits Christmas won't be normal this year as England prepares to move out of lockdown next month and into a stricter three-tier system of local coronavirus restrictions. The Prime Minister will announce the details to MPs in the Commons tomorrow. 4 people have been arrested in what South Wales police describe as a large disturbance in Cardiff city centre. 6 people were taken to University Hospital of Wales. 3 of those had been stabbed. The weather: blustery showers across the north of the UK, heaviest and most frequent in northern Scotland, dry in central parts of England, cloudier in the south with light rain or drizzle at times, a high of 12 degrees.
LBC Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Loads of you getting in touch with us this morning to have your say on Priti Patel and how she remains in the job as Home Secretary. 84850 to text. Here's Neil. It's easy to defend Priti Patel, not that I want to. We all know that this is a matter of the civil service not complying with the wishes of their minister, because they fundamentally disagree with what the government wants to do around Brexit and illegal immigration. As a result, Priti Patel has probably got forceful with the civil servants involved. They have taken offence and made a decision to try and oust her. We all know that's the top and bottom of it. The rest is a facade, says Neil, designed to throw us plebs off about what's really behind it. I just don't know if there's the evidence to come to that conclusion. Is there the evidence to suggest that everything that the Home Secretary has tried to do in the Home Office has been blocked and avoided because the civil servants there don't agree with her view on Brexit? I'm not sure. There have certainly been occasions when it's reported that Priti Patel has asked civil servants to look into some, what could we describe them as, some slightly odd techniques to try and push back some of the boats that make their way across the channel, the wave machines in the channel, things like that, that there were ministerial directions given about some orders that may well have fallen foul of the rule of law. That will have been dealt with swiftly. But the idea that because she's a Brexiteer or because she's British Asian, as Stuart Jackson was telling us earlier, then she gets a different kind of treatment. Where's the evidence for that? 0345 6060 973. More of your calls in just a mo. Let's turn to the Archbishop of Canterbury, pictured on the front page of the Sunday Times because, and I'd forgotten this, as is the case with quite a number of his former people in that role, he's going to be taking a sabbatical for spiritual renewal, according to the Sunday Telegraph. He will take a break from his role from May to September next year. That may well stop him then lobbying the government to change course when it comes to things like foreign aid. Justin Welby has warned Boris Johnson against cutting the UK's overseas aid budget. As you know, the government wants to reduce it from 0.7% of national income down to 0.5%. Mr. Welby said helping the world's poorest is one of the great moral and ethical achievements of our country. Let's speak to Bishop Stephen Lowe, former Bishop of Hume in Greater Manchester, former advisor to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Bishop Lowe. Why do you think the government is deciding to ignore your former boss?
I have no idea, Tom. I find this notion of cutting the percentage of overseas aid quite extraordinary. There was a clear manifesto commitment by the Conservative Party to hold on to 0.7% of national income for overseas aid. That is now being reneged on, and it illustrates for me, which relates back to the Priti Patel discussion, the whole issue of moral bankruptcy within the government at the moment. There is no readiness to recognise that actually helping the poorest, even when we are finding things a bit difficult ourselves, is actually a moral requirement upon us. And we, in a way, have led the world on this issue. And I was proud of what we did and the Cameron government did in taking up the percentage of overseas aid to that requirement.
Why not make it 1% then? Why not make it 1% or 1.7%?
I would love it to be, but the international agreed
5%.
target, the international agreed target is 0.7%. If we got up to that, every country in the world got up to that level, then
yes,
the problem
and how many? But Bishop, sorry to interrupt, Stephen, but how many other European countries reach that target of 0.7%?
I think I can't give you the figures now, Tom, but I think a fair number are aiming at
one other country contributes more to the ODA budget than Britain, and I think that's Sweden.
Yeah, well,
so to say that we are morally bankrupt when we're the largest donor to the problems in Syria, we spend outside of the aid budget huge amounts of money, rightly, in helping the world's poorest. The government did not know that a pandemic was around the corner, and things need to be cut accordingly.
But is it at the same time right to increase our budget on defence while cutting our budget on overseas aid? That seems to be an extraordinary decision. And at a time when
we can now offer more resources to protect the most vulnerable around the world from civil strife. Of course we can. There are British soldiers going out to Mali as part of UN peacekeeping missions to try and deal with the terrorist threat in that particular country.
that is not what the increase in the defence spending budget is about, as you know, Tom. Actually, what we are doing is cutting overseas aid at a time when COVID, which sees no barriers in terms of international boundaries, is going through Africa and so on, and they need help in terms of vaccination
Why is it not a moral issue to try and protect the nation? I don't understand why is it apparently immoral to spend more money in trying to protect the country from the threats that are changing all the time, for whether it's cyber attacks or satellites in space or rockets that are being built. Why is it immoral to spend money on that?
But Tom, I didn't say it was immoral. I said what was immoral
where's the
was
moral case for
actually increasing the defence budget while at the same time cutting the overseas aid budget seems to me to be an extraordinary decision in terms of morality. And there is an issue to me. This was a government that actually committed itself in its manifesto to keeping that 0.7% and now is reneging on that decision. And it's typical, I'm afraid, of a government that is losing its moral compass.
Do you think the French government, the Canadian government, the Belgian government, the Italian government, do you think they're immoral?
Who's suggesting that I said they were immoral? Actually,
they spend much less than us on foreign aid. Is that a moral issue too?
The European Union actually spends an enormous amount on foreign aid, and we have
those individual countries do not reach 0.7% of GNI, and they've never got anywhere close. The Italians are something like 0.2.
Yeah, well, I regret the Italians' decision to send 1.2%, but we are the fifth richest economy in the world, and I think we have a moral obligation to be helping the poorest in the world reach out and have things like fresh water, sanitation, and obviously to be able to handle with a vaccination regime the COVID outbreak. Otherwise,
and I'm sure those programs will continue, Bishop. I'm sure those programs will continue because you're right, there is a moral case. Well, why should this country send money to programs in North Korea as it's been doing? Why should we help try and send, or why should we share the burden of responsibility for the poorest people in India with the Indian government who are building space programs?
I think there are major questions to be asked about those programs in both North Korea and China. And I think Priti Patel, when she was Secretary of International Development, actually pledged to do that. I'm not sure whether they're still happening, Tom. I think this is, to some extent, old news. What I have seen personally, and what Archbishop Welby was talking about, was a sort of programs that make the real difference to the poorest people in the world. And I've seen that on the ground in Africa, particularly, and it's very moving indeed. And I felt proud to be British, to know that we were doing something positive to help those people.
Listen, I agree with you about the efficacy of the programs that work are astonishing, and they do huge amounts to help people who are struggling in ways we can't even imagine in this country. But there is also, and I've seen it too, the waste of the lack of efficacy of some of those funds, and the fact that to reach that legal target of 0.7%, money is shoveled out the door in increasingly large amounts to people who perhaps don't need it.
Well, I'm not sure. I would like to see more use of the organisations that have been campaigning, like Oxfam and Christian Aid, and partnership with local people. That is what the key to good international development is, actually working on the ground with local people to help them improve their own circumstances. That's the key. And big international programmes funneled through governments don't tend to work with the same efficacy. And I want us to be seen to be working in that way on the ground with local people.
Always good to talk to you. Never want to row with a bishop, particularly not on a Sunday. Bishop Stephen Lowe, really good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Former Bishop of Hume in Greater Manchester, former advisor to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, as well as weighing in on matters political, is now off on a sabbatical. 0345 6060 973 if you want to weigh in about Priti Patel. Text here on 84850. Being an ethnic minority and Brexit does not excuse bullying. Although if you're butting up against civil servants who are refusing to carry out your orders, maybe you would be inclined to use a couple of Fs and Jeffs. Come to your calls in a few moments, 11:45.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. LBC.
Britain's top police officer, Dame Cressida Dick from London's Metropolitan Police.
The Home Secretary has not always met the high standards required of ministers. You probably, of anybody outside of government, work closely with her. Is that the Priti Patel you recognise, Commissioner?
I can't comment on that report. I haven't seen it. I have a very productive working relationship with this Home Secretary, as I have with last.
Does that sound like the Home Secretary you will have worked with?
I pride myself on not being a gossip, so I wouldn't be commenting whoever it was.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7. LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday, with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
10 to 12 the time. I have to say, a lot of support for Priti Patel out there, particularly on 84850 this morning. Lots of you suggesting that actually what kind of report is it that looks into allegations of bullying but interviews neither the person who's made the allegations, or at least the chief complainant in this case. The reports this morning suggest that the author of the report was blocked from speaking to the chief complainant, Sir Philip Rutnam. But what kind of report is it that doesn't interview the person who's being complained about? Priti Patel wasn't spoken to by the author of this report. So what actually is this? Joe's in Wimbledon this morning. Hi, Joe.
Yes, hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Like one of your other callers expressed, I really do think that, she was very unlikely to have spoken to anyone higher up the chain than her. I doubt she'd have gone toe-to-toe with somebody like Rishi Sunak, but it would be people that are much lower down the chain than her. It's a kind of an animalistic behaviour, to be honest. You're sort of, you want to get in with the people that are higher up the chain, but somebody lower down the chain, you would take out your frustrations and your lack of progress and your anger out on. This is always the way it goes. You want to stay in with the right people so you can go higher up the chain, but people lower down the chain are less of a priority. Obviously it's not behaviour she should have been allowed to get away with, but I do, as I recall, remember that a former Prime Minister was sort of called out for this sort of behaviour. I believe, I'm not 100%, but I believe it was Gordon Brown who was apparently called out for this sort of behaviour. But, because he's a man and possibly because he's a white man, nothing much was done about it, as I recall. But perhaps because she's a woman and she's a woman of colour, it's made a very big deal.
Joe, I honestly, if you're racist, you're going to be racist. So regardless of the character, regardless of the nature of the complaint that's being made, if you're a misogynist, you're going to be misogynist about it. I think the story, the allegation is that Gordon Brown, I think, threw a bottle of wine at the wall or something in frustration at some act that had taken place.
Extreme behaviour, isn't it?
Well, it's an outburst. Absolutely, I wouldn't constitute it as bullying though, unless you think the walls had a hard time.
It wasn't just on one occasion. Well, he's not going to just do that with nobody in the room, probably, is he? But somebody's obviously witnessed it to recount it.
Well, Joe, you make a fair point about the heightened states that people get in when they're in these top jobs. Thank you for the call. Here's Alan in Orpington this morning. Hi there, Alan.
Hello there. I back Priti Patel all the way. I think she might have been taking it out on somebody who was getting too big for their boots. And we don't know who said what to whom yet, do we? Nobody's got the full report.
No, so in those circumstances, how can you back her if you don't know?
We until the full report comes out and we know who said what to whom, let's shut up about it. And I would like to just allude to a newscaster on Sky News last night, Mark Austin. Right. He touched upon something which I was thinking about, that what they objected to at the Home Office was a non-white woman taking charge. And why does that, Alan? That's all I can recall what he said. But
so civil servants are not only feckless because they're not doing what's asked of them; they're also racist, are they?
I can't say that, can I? Because I don't know. Well, I'm not speculating.
Yeah, but then why on earth are we using it as a measure to justify Priti Patel's reported behaviour if we don't know? Alan, listen, thank you. I want to get to Nick, who's in Dulwich this hour. Hi there, Nick.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. A couple of things come to mind. One, it's interesting your bishop saying how morally bankrupt the government is, and I think I'd go along with that. And this is an example of that. In terms of the way of her being saved, I'm amazed that the Cabinet Secretary wasn't involved, because normally the Cabinet Secretary would advise the Prime Minister on exactly matters like this. So he ignored the advice of the Cabinet Secretary, who I think is now a relatively inexperienced person compared to Mark Sedgwick.
He's definitely not. Well, he's definitely not inexperienced, Simon Case, but he. Well, I think there is a separate. With respect, there is a separate body within the Cabinet Office that does look at issues like ethics and ministerial behaviour.
Yes, but the dismissal of a minister like that, I refuse to believe the Cabinet Secretary wouldn't have been consulted on that one. That's just not the way it works. And I know a little bit about this. And also, in terms of publishing this report, I mean, why can't they just publish it in a redacted fashion and remove people's names from it? But
you would say, Nick, at this moment, based on what we're hearing about what's contained in the report and everything that Boris Johnson has done and everything that Priti Patel has said subsequently, that she needed to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just in terms of the bullying and effing and blinding and so forth. There's a great difference in being annoyed at some matter rather than a person, an individual. You see what I mean? So Gordon Brown might be chucking a bottle of wine at the wall, being annoyed at the situation, but it doesn't mean he's taking out as a person specifically. I think that's a big difference here.
Yeah, I have to say, if someone threw a bottle of wine at a wall behind me, I mean, it sounds like a scene in EastEnders, I'd be a little bit intimidated. Nick, hang on the line. William's in Croydon this morning. Hi, William.
Yes, hello there. Morning to you. The far more important story to me is that the self-same summary found that Priti Patel suffered just a justifiable frustration, and I quote the phrase, at senior officials within the Home Office either refusing or being unable to carry out her instructions. Now, frankly, if officials are not carrying out what the elected government of the day, ministers, require them to do, the officials should go. And being shouted at with a few F's and J's is frankly the minimum that Philip Rutland on a £200,000 a year should put up with. We don't.
Yeah, but it depends.
Hang on a second, William. We got the point. William, we got the point.
If people are asking for things that are impossible, and then they can't implement them, this is kind of the issue with someone who really doesn't get the system, and I don't think she's very good. I mean, last year she was saying, I'll have 72 hours to sort out the migrant process, thinking just by, throwing her weight around and shouting she could get things done. It's much more complicated than that. And look at these ridiculous schemes you have, sending people to South Jordan and God knows where.
Hang on a sec, Nick. Let William go.
If someone cannot carry out the instruction given to them, then at that point say, I can't do it. Get someone else in who feels they can.
Yeah, but
get someone else in. Hang on a sec. No, my turn now. Nick, hang on, William. Hang on. No, pause there, gentlemen, please. Pause there, gentlemen. This is a family show. You can't get someone who's going to come in to stick a wave machine in the channel to push back the boats.
Then don't go off and try and do it. I don't know the specific things Philip Rutland allegedly didn't.
No. This is what reportedly was asked of civil servants to look into to try and deter those boats. Is to try and stick a wave machine in the channel or nets to catch them and tow them back. And if you're a civil servant, you look at this, you go, okay, thank you very much, Secretary of State. I'll have a look at this. No, I'm afraid it can't be done. Then what? You get sworn at.
That's not what the report said, Tom.
We don't know what the report says. You haven't read it.
Well, we don't know exactly.
But the instruction is you then say, sorry, I can't do it because, and you explain to the person why certain things cannot be done. That's
how do you know that didn't happen? How do you know exactly that didn't happen? They said, look, this is a ridiculous idea. We can't be done. And then she throws her toys out the pram. I think that's quite likely.
The report uses the phrase justifiable frustration. Justifiable frustration.
But there's always, William, thank you, and Nick, thank you to. Well, listen, gents, thank you to you both. I'm afraid there is always going to be in these kind of top jobs an element of frustration with this because getting stuff done, getting stuff through is very, very hard. I can't, one of the things I take from that job that I used to do is just how difficult it is, even from the centre of government, even as the Prime Minister, to actually get stuff through to get the machine into gear. That doesn't mean you need to go screaming and shouting your way about Whitehall. We move on. Coming up after the news at midday, it's all going to end in tears, I'm afraid. As much as the lockdown ending on December the 2nd is good news for businesses, good news for families, it seems as though, as Cabinet meets this afternoon, that we're going to get tougher tiered system when we come out of lockdown and more areas placed into the tougher tier system. One of the ideas being floated is that you're going to be needing to have a freedom pass on you to show your papers that you are indeed free of coronavirus after a couple of tests. Do you want to show your papers to prove that?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 12 o'clock, the TUC and UNISON are refusing to rule out strike action by public sector workers if the government imposes a pay cap or freeze on millions of their members. UNISON's Assistant General Secretary Christina McAnea has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC the plan is ill thought out.
Just as we're still in the middle of the pandemic, we're still talking about public sector workers having to step up to the plate. This is people who've continued to work during the pandemic, as have lots of other people in shops, etc. But they are literally putting their lives on the at risk here, their own lives and their families' lives. And this is about, not just the NHS, but it's about people who work in care homes, people who provide care services.
The reported pay freeze comes days after the UK announced the biggest defence spending increase since the Cold War. An extra £16.5 billion will be made available for a new cyber force, space command and artificial intelligence over the next 4 years. Former Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon has told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC that without defence, there might not be an NHS.
We have to defend our country. That comes first. You can't have a successful economy. You can't have a properly funded NHS if it's being attacked by cyber from the other side of the world. So we have to spend money on defence.
In other headlines this hour, the Chancellor confirms England will return to a stricter three-tiered system when its lockdown ends next month. Rishi Sunak's comments come ahead of the Prime Minister announcing his COVID winter plan to MPs in the Commons tomorrow.
Frustrating as it is for all of us, Christmas is not going to be normal this year. But that said, the Prime Minister and everyone else were looking at ways to see how families can spend some time with each other over Christmas period. Obviously, that's something that we would like to do, and it's been a difficult year for all of us.
4 people have been arrested in what South Wales police describe as a large disturbance in Cardiff city centre. 6 people were taken to the University Hospital of Wales. 3 of those had been stabbed. 5 men from London and Kent have been arrested after police were called to an illegal rave in Essex. Police describe what happened as a clear and blatant breach of the government's COVID-19 regulations in North Weald. Prince William has had a virtual meeting with fathers in London. Along with the Duchess of Cambridge, they spoke with those involved in a charity that helps men. William said he's concerned that some fathers don't know where to go for help. The weather, blustery showers across the north of the UK, heaviest and most frequent in northern Scotland, dry in central parts of England, cloudier in the south, a light rain or drizzle at times, a high of 12 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Philip Chrysikos.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Just gone midday. Very good afternoon to you. Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC, striding into Sunday afternoon like a colossus of a programme. Thank you very much for joining us here this Sunday afternoon. We'll talk in a few moments about the front page story on The Observer that Boris Johnson, and this is a quote, acted illegally over jobs for top anti-COVID staff. This is the suggestion made by the Good Law Project, whom we'll speak to in about half an hour's time, that Boris Johnson and his Health Secretary Matt Hancock acted unlawfully when appointing 3 key figures. Those key figures include people like Dido Harding, head of Test and Trace, to those roles because those posts were not advertised. They were not done in a way which this particular group suggests may have been unlawful. We'll speak to them about what their case is and where it's going to be heard at the High Court a little bit later on. We'll talk to Andy Burnham too, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, on the subject that I want to talk to you about now, which is the tier system that we're going to get more detail of over the coming hours, because that is what we're told we're going to enter into after December the 2nd and the lockdown finally ends. Boris Johnson has been resolute in saying that by December the 2nd, or on December the 2nd, the 4-week lockdown in England will come to an end. MPs will get to vote on that, but that what comes after is being fleshed out not just in the Sunday papers, but in Cabinet a little bit later on today. And it seems as though, for some of us, it may well be that the new normal after lockdown is actually pretty close to lockdown anyway. A new, harsher 3-tier system is going to be introduced. More areas, we're told, will be placed into higher tiers than before the lockdown. This comes after warnings from sage scientists that the previous levels of restrictions were not strong enough and a tougher regional approach was needed. The Sunday Telegraph says that they can say that everywhere from factories and offices to towns and cities will be blitzed with mass testing if cases start to rise, under plans to be set out this week. That I suggest is actually pretty good news. The other element of it is this that I wanted to spend some time looking at. The reports in the paper suggest people are set to be given freedom passes to allow them to live life as normal as possible. As long as they have had 2 negative coronavirus tests a week, they can get back to somewhere normal. Passport makers are in talks with the government to provide travellers with secure certificates to prove they are no longer carrying coronavirus. So you may well be asked, if you get to your shop or you go to the cinema or you get to a pub, to produce your papers to show that you are coronavirus free. 0345 6060 973. I know that there has been a heck of a lot of change over the last few months, over the course of this year, but showing your pass to prove that your health's okay, I wonder how you feel about that. We'll speak to Richard Tice, the businessman, the chair of Reform UK, formerly the Brexit Party. First, Chris Hobson joins us, Chief Executive of NHS Providers. Thank you very much for joining the programme, both. Let's start with you first, Mr Hobson. I wonder, as you look at this new tier system, whether it's an indication that the last one didn't work. Very good morning. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Tom. Well, I think all of us in the NHS have been very clear, which is that we're about to enter winter, which is our busiest period of the year. We know we've got 3 sets of patients we need to look after: COVID-19 patients, people who whose care we unfortunately had to delay as a result of the first phase, and we know that over winter we get very large numbers of emergency patients. And we're very clear, which is it's our obligation and our job to make sure we treat all of those patients. The bit that you can control, you can't control if somebody has a heart attack or a stroke or if they slip over on the ice and break their wrists. You can control the number of COVID patients. So we've been arguing very clearly right from the start that if you want the NHS to do its job over winter, we've got to try to control the number of COVID patients. And at this point, the only way we can do that is by restricting social contact. When we get to next spring and next summer, hopefully that combination of rapid turnaround mass testing meets vaccines, meets therapeutic drugs, that offers us a way out. But at the moment, the only way we can control the spread of COVID is through lockdowns, and that's the way we ensure the NHS gets to do its job this winter at its busiest time of year.
I'll bring Richard Tyson in just a moment, because I think he's going to burst a blood vessel in a moment, judging by what you were saying there, Chris. The World Health Organization has said very clearly that the first weapon in the fight against coronavirus should not be a lockdown.
Absolutely right. The first weapon in the fight against coronavirus should be face-space mask. And we all know that. It should be people adopting, very, very good hand hygiene.
And yet until spring, summer next year, your suggestion is that the NHS will not survive unless there are lockdowns.
I'm not saying the NHS won't survive, because it's our job to treat any patients who come in through the door. What I'm saying is, if we are overrun with COVID patients, then we are going to find it difficult to treat emergency patients at winter and also treat all of those people who've had to already wait far too long. And all I'm saying is that, the thing that people keep missing is we are already under huge pressure. And I know that Richard will use the argument about look at the national figures, but what thing people need to do is they need to go on the ground and they need to talk to hospital chief executives, as I talk to them every day of the week. And what they are saying to me at the moment is they are under real pressure. So if you want people at the NHS to treat people who need to be treated, then we do need to ensure that we control the flow of COVID patients. And like it or not, the only way we can do that at this point is through appropriate restrictions on social contact. So, Tom, one of the things that people seem to forget is the complete underlying logic here, which is the more social contact that you have, the more virus spread that you get.
The virus spreads. Okay. Well, let me bring in Mr. Tice, because he's waited patiently. Mr. Tice, your thoughts on the idea of using lockdown until spring, summer to reduce contact to protect the NHS?
The truth is that, firstly, lockdowns don't work. And we understand, of course, no one wants the NHS to be overrun. But if you look at the data, actually, hospital admissions, the occupancy of ICU beds, they are no higher than the 5-year average. They are not being overrun in either hospital admissions or beds. Why? Because the reality is the whole government strategy is being driven by cases that are reported using the PCR test. Fundamentally, the PCR test is not supposed to be used on an industrial scale with mass testing. It is showing up huge inaccuracies, which was, for example, highlighted by the Channel 4 dispatches programme last Monday. Portugal has just ruled that PCR test is not accurate enough to justify lockdowns. And we're seeing now a live comparative between the new lateral flow tests and PCR testing in Liverpool. And what we're seeing, the lateral flow tests, testing across the population of Liverpool, which, bearing in mind, of course, was understood to have a very high case rate per 100,000. The lateral flow test there is showing 0.6%, about what you might expect for flu, whereas the PCR test in Liverpool, amongst the same population, is throwing 3%. So
isn't that because they're testing different people? They're testing people at different points. There are different tests at various stages, and one of them is testing asymptomatic people, and the other is testing symptomatic people.
And that is nonsense. The idea that there are 50 to 60,000 people in Liverpool who believe they've got COVID, who've got some form of illness or symptoms, is a nonsense. It's just simply not true. And
when you say though that, let me just pick you up on that, because go on. You finish very quickly, and then I must pick you up on what you've just said.
The percentage of cases to tests across the whole country ranges between 6 and 9%, day in, day out, right, across all the national testing. Liverpool, where you're suggesting that those who seek a PCR test feel they may have some form of symptoms, that's down at 3%. So that's below the national average. So that completely disproves the suggestion from those who say that only those in Liverpool who have taken the PCR test have some form of symptoms. There is a serious question about the accuracy of the PCR test, which is fundamentally misdirecting SAGE, it's misdirecting the government, and it is causing a pseudo-perception that there is a pandemic continuing, where actually, if for example, and the way to prove this, Tom, is simply wherever there's a positive PCR test, let's double check it with a lateral flow test. And I think what you'll see is that actually there is a massive difference between the two, and that will change the perception of government. Let me bring Chris Hopson back in, because he's itching to get back in. Chris.
So if there's nonsense being talked, it's Richard who's talking nonsense. If lockdowns don't work, how come they worked in the first phase when we went into lockdown, and that was the way that we reduced the casework? The ICU beds are really not particularly relevant at this point, because what Richard fails to understand is that actually we've changed the way that we treat COVID patients. We actually are dealing with a much higher percentage of them in general and acute beds, because they no longer need mechanical ventilation. You actually treat them on general and acute wards with breathing machines that don't require ICU or critical care. So the number of critical care beds is no longer a sensible measure of actually the volume of COVID casework. If Richard wants to know what the volume of COVID casework is, instead of talking about stuff like relative effectiveness of PCR tests and lateral flow tests, just ask the very, very simple question: how many patients have we got in hospitals at the moment with COVID? And the answer is it's virtually exactly the same as it was in the first phase. So all we're saying is that these anti-lockdowners can make all of the arguments they want, but what they can't do is ignore the basic facts. And the facts are, at the moment, the NHS is under huge amounts of pressure. In many parts of the country, we are seeing exponential rises in terms of the number of cases. Luckily, those at the front of the queue, because they went into tougher lockdown measures first, like Manchester and Liverpool, the case numbers are coming down. But in other parts of the country, they are still going up. And that's why we need to ensure that we have appropriate measures to restrict social contact, because the answer, as I said, the logic is inexorable. The only way that we can control COVID at the moment is through restricting social contact. So Richard's talking nonsense.
We're going to run out of time, but let me bring Richard back in on that, because you're shaking your head quite strongly there, Mr. Tice, about the idea that you're talking nonsense. It is fair to say, though, isn't it, that the lockdown worked in the first phase and may well work this time because it's brought R down and it's brought the number of cases down?
The reality is that the COVID swept through the population at a huge rate back in February and March. That is the reality. Coronaviruses don't have second waves. Earlier, Chris said that there was a crisis in hospital admissions and ICU. Now he's saying we shouldn't use ICU admissions. The truth is, if you look at respiratory illnesses going into hospitals, they are currently running week on week well below the normal 5-year average. Why? Because there is a similar increase in COVID-related cases who've had a positive PCR test. It's no surprise that one is offsetting the other, Tom, because the PCR test is fundamentally flawed. It's producing inaccurate results, which is driving people, understandably, to think there is a COVID crisis in hospitals. There isn't. There is the normal winter pressures that Chris and people in the NHS always quite rightly highlight every year. We understand that it's always under pressure. We're going into winter. It's the normal. But there is no difference from the 5-year average in hospital admissions, in ICU admissions, and there's been no excess deaths cumulatively since the summer.
I'm going to have to ask you both in a word to answer this question, if I may. So in order to try and show that people who have had COVID tests and are free of COVID can operate with some degree of relative normality, they would have to carry a freedom pass, a bit of paper that the authorities could ask for them to produce to show that they are COVID free. In a word, Mr. Tice, Mr. Hobson, would you carry one? Chris first.
I think we need to be very careful about importing ideas that have worked in different societies, like in Southeast Asia, which have got very different national cultures, and which, for example, state surveillance and producing papers is something that you do every day of the week. I just think we need to be careful about, is that culturally appropriate for this country? Question mark.
Mr. Tice?
Yes, I would, as long as it's the lateral flow test that will give much more accurate results and will bring us back to normal. Frankly, we could go back to normal before Christmas on that basis, Tom. It's so important. We should double check all the PCR tests. They will be shown to be flawed, and then we can start to get back to normal.
Richard Tice, businessman, chair of Reform UK, formerly the Brexit Party. Thank you to you. And Chris Hobson, chief executive of NHS Providers. Good to see you both. Thank you for joining the programme this afternoon. 0345 6060 973. Chris in Stubbington. Tom, I would be happy to show a freedom pass showing I'm free of COVID. I would be equally happy to carry a national ID card. I think we may need a proper lockdown and schools closed from December the 18th until January the 20th. You must be joking, man. Mind you, the schools will be on holiday for a lot of that time anyway. 0345 6060 973 as part of the way out of this particular lockdown in England on December the 2nd. Stronger, harsher tiers. Plus, in order to show that you are free from COVID, you carry a pass with you, you show your papers. To pick up on Chris Hobson's question, culturally, is that appropriate for a country of ours that is a small L liberal, free democracy? Come to your calls in just a moment. Tom Swarbrick here, 1218.
The fight against coronavirus. For the very latest, stay with LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday, with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
So it may well be a promise that Boris Johnson keeps, that on December the 2nd, England comes out of the lockdown that we find ourselves in. It's just that we would go into a three-tiered system. Except this one is going to be a lot harsher than the last one we were in, perhaps an indication that the last one didn't particularly work. If you were in, the area I live was in Tier 1 before this lockdown came in, and it was kind of as normal, really. I mean, people followed the rules about masks and not gathering in crowds of more than 6 people and households and stuff like that. But, you know, you could still go to the pub, you could still go play golf, you could still see people, all that kind of stuff. Whereas I don't think that is going to be the case, perhaps, if Tier 1 is brought back in other parts of the country. On top of that, it strikes me that people, in order to show that they are COVID-free, may well need to show some bit of paper or something to say, I've had 2 tests, I'm absolutely fine. On that point, Tracy says, so everyone's going to need a travel pass. Good luck with that. No one could get tested just once, let alone twice a week. Hull has the highest level of infection in England. It is running at 3 times the national average, way above Liverpool when the army was sent in to help. Hull has been promised 10,000 test kits for a population of 250,000. The leader of Hull Council wrote to the PM last week pleading for help. Response, there came none. So now we will need tests twice a week to be able to go out. Promises again, won't happen up here, says Tracy, presumably in Hull. Brent in Derby. Hi there, Brent.
Hi, lockdown. This isn't a lockdown, really. A lockdown is a term that you get in prisons when people are in their cells and they do not move. This is a mockdown, to be perfectly honest with you. The half in, half out tiered system, the half in, half out lockdown.
Well, hang on a second. Well, listen, are you therefore saying that, you know, everything should be shut down, shut schools, get everyone back at home, house arrest type of lockdown, otherwise it's a mockdown?
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Right, okay, well, in which case, how do you then explain why it is that the R number is coming down? It's not quite below 1 yet, but if we're to believe what we're told by the experts, it's at 1.1. The aim is to get R down sufficiently to allow people to open up again. Why do we need this full tightening and complete loss of freedom in order to do the same thing that this particular lockdown has done?
Well, we're going to go back to the tiered system, which clearly didn't work, because then we're back to square one in a couple of weeks. So why
but the tier system's going to change.
Yeah, to what? More of the same. We basically lost people. We basically lost the public. The level of trust that the government now, they've messed it up, basically. You want a lockdown, have a lockdown. But calling a lockdown when it's not a lockdown, it's ridiculous. I know my life's not changed whatsoever. I share a room with 30 individuals indoors. We're seeing primary school cases increase. We're seeing secondary school increases. The elephant in the room is our young people. We were told they don't get it, they don't spread it. We know that's a lie. So something has to be done about our young people. And it's not that their own fault, because they go to school and they are in bubbles. Yes, but those bubbles collapse. We are in a situation where we should go hard, go fast, proper lockdown, then we get a longer period when we have some freedom, then a lockdown again. So we should have rolling circuit breakers within a couple of weeks. That allows us to open, then lock it down, allows us to open, then lock it down. What we're slowly doing is we're slowly bleeding out, bit by bit, slowly grinding us down, half in, half out. It's all over the shop. If they're going to do it, it's typical of this government. If they're going to do it right. And as for freedom passes...
I don't know, though, Brent, sorry, just to pick up on that, because you've had a good time to explain. I don't know that shutting schools completely for, 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks, however long it's going to take, is the right thing to do, actually. I don't know that... 2 weeks. How do you know it's 2 weeks? It could be 3 weeks. You don't know. It might be that R doesn't come down quick enough, or it might be there are other factors there that aren't affected by, the household catching of it. If it is spread by young children, may increase. You don't know. So you could be locked down in that way for 4 weeks. Or last time, by the way, sorry, Brent, to interrupt. Yeah. Last time we went into an unending lockdown, we were there for 7 or 8 weeks.
That was a dozen right. That wasn't a lockdown. We keep calling it a lockdown. It wasn't a lockdown.
So tell that to the people who have lost their jobs. Tell that to people who've seen their industries go to the wall.
I could fully agree with them, because we've done such a half-baked job of it that we keep calling it a lockdown when it's not a lockdown, because it's
hang on a second. No. Sorry. A tougher lockdown means that other parts of the economy get absolutely battered.
And in the long run, they'll be better off because they can open up more. That's the problem. This
you can't just restart. You can't just restart areas of the economy for where there is no demand. You can't just turn it off and turn it on again.
Well, people have been able to do that, haven't they?
No, they haven't. People have not been able to go. People have lost their jobs during this.
They have lost their jobs doing it, but they lost their jobs because we stayed in far too long, because the government didn't listen to the science. They were told weeks in advance in September, October, go hard, go fast, go early,
no.
get it done.
Sorry. This is a complete misunderstanding or misreading, deliberately, I may say, if I hear you right, Brent, of what the scientists were advising in the summer. They were saying that opening up was happening too quickly, and the government were panned for going against that and opening up in the summer.
Yeah, but they opened up too quickly because they locked down too late, because they didn't listen to the original science in the first place. And we're in the same situation as again.
Right, so you'd be locked down until what point?
No, we don't need. We need a proper. See, this is the thing. We're calling it a lockdown, but we're not. It is not a lockdown.
Okay, so your version of lockdown, it's got going around the trees again. Your version of lockdown, schools shut, everyone at home, nothing moves, everyone's set, and you can't leave your home. How long does that last for?
2 to 3 weeks. And
2 to 3. So we now increased it. So it's now 2 to 3 weeks. And if at the end of 3 weeks it's not changed,
how long do people isolate
it's ridiculous.
How long do people isolate for? 2 weeks. And go to your freedom passes. On regards to the freedom passes, who gets them? That's for starters. How do you get the fairness of them? Is it going to be contracted out to one of the government contractors who are God knows how? And it's draconian. It's absolutely it's very dangerous. It's a dangerous precedent to go down that route when we talk about this government and the loss of faith that they've had. Because they have lost the faith. And as the tiered system is, we're going back to tiered system. People just hear tier system and go, it didn't work to begin with. So they do need to think outside the box.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you on the point that the tiered system before the lockdown, the lower tiers, tier 2, tier 1, it didn't seem to do enough. So that's why they're agreeing at a cabinet today about what is going to happen in those new tiers that makes them a bit tougher. Brent, I appreciate your time. Thank you. Robert's in Chiswick. Hi there, Robert.
Hi there. I just I listened to Richard Tice, with whom I have a lot of sympathy in terms of his overall argument about ending lockdown. I'm very sympathetic to that. But unfortunately, he was using very inaccurate kind of material about when he was talking about testing. He was saying that PCR tests were inaccurate and that mass testing LFT devices were the kind of the best in class. Unfortunately, that's totally opposite of what it is. The PCR tests have 99-100% accuracy. That's why they're used within the NHS. And the LFT tests, or the mass testing screening devices, there's none available around the world yet of sufficient sensitivity and specificity to allow us to open up the economy. So it's an entirely false argument that he's using in support, although I'm sympathetic to his argument that we should reopen the economy.
Listen,
using kind of totally inaccurate broad brush strokes about testing to kind of...
Well, look, I agree. I don't think there is an easy... because if there were, they'd already have done it. That there's an easy way out of this that means, it's that particular error of logic or that particular error of testing that means that actually we can just end this all and come out and go back to normal. I just don't think that's the case.
I totally agree, because there's a lot of the scientists have gone hell for leather to try and get this product out. I mean, the UK it's actually an unsung story about how well the UK doing is developing these LFT tests. And I think once they are released, hopefully, I think Q1.
Those are the lateral flow ones, right? The lateral flow.
I mean, I can name a couple of companies if you wanted, but you probably wouldn't prefer me to. But there's a company in Yorkshire called the Vactor who are leading the kind of design of this. They've been working with the government for 6 months. We're close, but to say that there's nothing happening with the LFT tests or that they're the gold standard.
So, Robert, in an environment, just to bring it back to the question, in an environment where there are people who can get tests, that those tests are likely to be working and efficient and get the right answer, in order to show that you haven't got COVID, would you be willing to walk around with a pass or, a lanyard or something on your phone to say that you've been tested twice and therefore you can come into the shop or go to the cinema or whatever?
Not particularly, because I'm probably more at the libertarian aspect of things. It's a little bit of a quandary for me, because I'm in favour of mass testing but against the concept of a dystopian freedom pass. I think that's very East Berlin. So it's a little bit of a quandary for me. I don't really know what the resolution is, but I'd be happy to take a test to prove it. But just to have the concept of a freedom pass is just not.
Were you someone out of interest, Robert? Yeah. Out of interest, were you somebody that was upset at the notion when the app was first discussed of downloading a sort of government-arranged app that could monitor where you are and who you come into contact with, or at least the devices that you come into contact with?
I wasn't essentially against that, and I know that, again, that's a little bit of a quandary, but I think just at some point we've got to get back to normal, and I think I was totally on board with the government, what they were doing early in the crisis, but for me, the argument point came to me was when, sorry, smoke alarm gone off. There we go.
No.
And no emergency, but so earlier in the year when the government was totally on board with what the government was doing, but the sea change for me was when it came to this second lockdown, or Keir Starmer talking about a fire break lock, all these different terminologies of lockdown. What happens after that? No one can answer that. No,
I'll let you go, Robert. You make a good point. I'll let you go and deal with whatever's setting the smoke alarm off. Maybe a change of battery needed. Thank you very much indeed for your call. 0345 6060 973. Would you be happy to carry a freedom pass in the same way that you're quite happy to wear a mask or download the NHS coronavirus app? You'd similarly be okay with having a piece of paper or a slip that says, yeah, I can go to the supermarket now because you've had 2 negative tests. 0345 6060 973. After the news headlines, did Boris Johnson and others act unlawfully over handing out those jobs for the COVID staff? People like Dido Harding will speak to the lawyer who's taking them to court next. Tom Swarbrick here, 12:32. News headlines now. Tim Humphrey.
Treasury ministers say there won't be a return to austerity in the upcoming spending review, but haven't explicitly ruled out a future public pay freeze. The Chancellor suggested any wage settlements need to be considered in the context of a wider economic climate. Rishi Sunak's also confirmed England will return to a stricter 3-tier system when the current lockdown ends on December the 2nd. The Prime Minister will detail his COVID winter plans in the Commons tomorrow. 4 people have been arrested on suspicion of violent disorder following an incident in Cardiff City Centre last night. Police say 6 people were taken to hospital with various injuries, including stab wounds. The weather, heavy showers in Scotland and northern England, dry elsewhere with some sunshine and a high of 10.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
Come back to your calls in a few moments' time, but the front pages of the newspapers are once again full of stories about people being appointed into a variety of jobs on the basis of, well, it doesn't seem like relative medical experience. The Sunday Times again continues, this is a third or fourth week running now, looking at some of the people who have been appointed relatively recently into government, this time around Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, appointing a very close friend of his into an advisor role. The Observer carries the story of a legal challenge that is coming to the government's appointment of three people in particular. They are Dido Harding, the head of Test and Trace, Kate Bingham, the chair of the Vaccine Task Force, and Mike Coop, the director of testing at NHS Test and Trace. This particular outfit suggests that those people were appointed unlawfully. One of the people bringing the claim is Jolyon Morm QC, the director of the Good Law Project, and he joins me on the line this afternoon. Thank you for being there, Mr. Morm. What is the skeleton argument that you are making about the appointment of these three people in particular?
Well, the law says that you have to have regard to the equality impacts of your actions if you're a public authority. And the law also says that you can't discriminate against people based on, in particular, race or disability or sex, and so on. And, of course, if you are an administration that is largely white, largely wealthy, male, able-bodied, then your peer group, and it seems as though the Conservative Party is choosing only from its peer group for these roles, is also going to look like you do. So there's a legal angle to this, which obviously is very important if you're bringing a lawsuit. But there's also a sort of public interest angle too, which is that if you're just looking amongst the shallow pool of your peer group to fill these vitally important roles for the protection of public health and, you know, through that the economy, you are missing out very able candidates in the deeper pool that you would be able to access if you advertised openly.
So
those are the foundations.
So your case is that they've ignored, equality legislation in who they've employed because they haven't opened it up to candidates from a wider variety of backgrounds?
Yes, that's absolutely so. They've chosen people who look and sound like them, and the pool of people who look and sound like them is not a pool of people that enables those who are black or those who are disabled or those who have any one of the other so-called protected strands in the equality legislation to access those jobs. So it's a kind of fairness point at its heart.
So, and the government legal department, I'm reading in the Observer now, say the urgency of the pandemic necessitated swift, ad hoc and temporary appointments. They say that they are not civil service roles, so fall outside the requirements for full and open competition.
Yeah, so there are two aspects to that, really. Certainly, there is a particular piece of legislation that governs some roles, and these roles fall outside that piece of legislation, but it doesn't mean that these roles are not subject to equalities legislation. So far as the need for swift appointments is concerned, these are appointments that have been made really rather recently. Some of them, they have to have been made recently, otherwise we can't bring a judicial review challenge in respect of them. And we've known about the pandemic since February. So you'll forgive me if I express a touch of scepticism about whether that was the real reason. We note also, of course, that government has made no attempt to advertise those roles on a permanent basis. It has stuck with those, two of them married to Conservative MPs, appointments that it made, as I say, from its own social pool.
But can people from that particular social pool who happen to be married to Conservative MPs who are also white not do a good job?
Of course they can do a good job. Nobody says that the fact that you are married to a Conservative MP means that you are incompetent, but nor does the fact that you are married to a Conservative MP mean that you ought to get access to these vitally important roles for the protection of public health that able-bodied people able people from outside that pool can't access. So, none of these people have obvious skills and qualifications for the jobs that they were appointed to. None of them have public health experience. They are basically
you might not need it. With respect, you might not, if you're trying to decide which vaccines to invest in, which companies to invest the money to build up the vaccine, you can have health advisors around you. You don't necessarily need to be a public health person yourself.
No, that is absolutely true. I mean, I'm not in a position to say...
Do you want them gone? Are you arguing... Is your case? Are you bringing about your case in order to try and get these people out of their jobs and somebody else in, or
no? I think these jobs are really, really important jobs. The country, as all of us know, is profoundly suffering. People are dying in their thousands of tens of thousands. So it's really, really important in the public interest that these roles be filled by the best people, not the best people who are also friends of the Conservative Party. But beyond that, we are pursuing a point that is of broad structural interest. And that point is this. Being a friend of a Tory MP should not be a necessary qualification for obtaining roles that carry with them the possibility of personal advancement or financial advancement for one's associates.
Okay. Jolyon Morn, good to talk to you. Jolyon Morn, QC Director of the Good Law Project. That case due to be heard, I think, in the High Court a little bit later on as that judicial review is launched. Let's come back to your calls about the lockdown that is apparently set to end on December the 2nd and where we're going to move to these tiers and the idea of needing a freedom pass to get around. Janice is in Brixton this afternoon. Hi there, Janice.
Hi there. Hello there.
Hello. What made you pick up the phone?
Right. I've been hearing a lot of discussion about what the government is planning to do moving forward. Should we have another lockdown? I mean, there hasn't been much discussion, but I'm concerned that if we do move into another lockdown, we're just going to be repeating the cycle for the next coming years. Should we go up and down with those various levels of contagious within society?
I agree that if you start to see lockdown as the best weapon to defeat the coronavirus, we're just going to move in and out of these things the whole time.
Yeah. Thing is, what I'd like to inquire about is that surely the government need to bring in other approaches to dealing with the COVID, and I haven't heard that much being discussed about the Great Barrington Declaration.
Oh, come on. You've had loads discussed about the Great Barrington Declaration.
I don't feel as though there's been much input in the media. I think the media
there's been tons of it. We've in fact, on this very programme, Janice, only a few weeks ago when that declaration was signed, we spoke to one of the epidemiologists, one of the theoretical epidemiologists who signed it.
I don't recall that discussion, I'm afraid. Apologies then.
Well, don't you worry, but I would, as I would do for everybody listening to this programme and watching this programme, I would encourage you, Janice, to download the Global Player, where you can listen back to this programme and you can find those interviews about the Great Barrington Declaration that took place on the programme. Thank you very much for your call. Just by the way, Janice?
Hello?
Is the noise behind you, your smoke alarm going off?
No, there's nothing going on. There's, it might be the radio in the background, but going back to, it doesn't look as though you're going to continue this conversation live, but I haven't seen any news feeds. Maybe radio discussions have discussed the Great Barrington, but I feel as though the government is wanting to push only one particular agenda, and that being lockdowns.
Well, they've come to the conclusion that they've come to. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor, I think a few weeks ago before they announced the lockdown, said that they had taken evidence from and heard discussion from people like Carl Hennigan, who is a scientist at the University of Oxford who holds a different view about the way out of this. So, I don't think that there has been a pause put or a kind of stay put on the idea of the Great Barrington Declaration. You can go and look at it, you can Google it, I'm sure, and you can find it where you look. I only ask about the smoke alarms because you'd be amazed the number of people who ring in, who have their smoke alarms flicking behind them, who then need to test the battery, and I just want to keep people safe. 0345 6060 973 is the number. We'll speak to Andy Burnham in a few moments, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, about what his region needs from the new tiers to keep people safe. this time from coronavirus. 12:46.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Majid Nawaz.
Britain has faced months of coronavirus restrictions, but the latest analysis shows that the grimmest forecast that plunged us into a second lockdown have not materialised. Is national lockdown backfiring?
Majid Nawaz on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
Matt in Kingston, you're going to be next on to talk about the lockdown, or rather the tiered system that is to come after the lockdown in England finishes on December the 2nd. But I'm joined by Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, on the programme this afternoon. Thank you for being there for us, Andy. So we're coming out into a new tiered system. What is your understanding of what that's going to mean for the people of Greater Manchester?
It's unclear at the moment. We will find out next week, it would seem. It's not being done by discussion or negotiation this time, which is Not good in my view. I think this has to be done more in consultation. But anyway, we are expecting to be in one of the higher tiers, I think it's fair to say, Tom. And I'm a little worried today by some of this talk of stronger or tougher tiers. You know, we've been under restrictions here since the summer now, and you can't ask people to live under perpetual restrictions or lockdowns. So I'm a little worried about what I'm hearing, to be honest. And I hope the government will take a proportionate and balanced approach.
Well, hang on, weren't you calling for tougher measures not that long ago?
Yeah, I called for a tougher circuit break so that we wouldn't have to have ongoing restrictions. That's the whole point of a tough circuit break, that you get the case numbers right.
We can't go from tough circuit break to nothing, can we? If case numbers
I wasn't saying no restrictions, and I'm not arguing for that today, but I did argue for a tougher circuit break so we could have got the case numbers right down in December. And that isn't going to happen because we've done the halfway house approach here. So that's a frustration for me. I still think there is a need for restrictions, but they need to be proportionate.
But is this lockdown that we all of us in England have undergone, and Greater Manchester too, has this not proven effective in getting the R rate down in your part of the world?
Actually, in our part of the world, we're the only part that's really recording a significant fall at the moment. The northwest is coming down. I think I'm right in saying that pretty much every other English region is still increasing, albeit at a slightly slower rate. So we have had quite a significant change, although it's from a very high level. So our cases are still high, Tom, but the trend is down. So don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing today for there to be no restrictions. It's working, but it's not gone far enough, I think, is the way to put it. And they should have gone further back in early November, because then we'd have been in a much stronger position now.
So you
but what I'm saying is there will need to be some restrictions, but get rid of the curfew, open the gyms, allow outdoor sport, because otherwise people's mental health will really suffer throughout December, January, February.
So just to be clear then, the restrictions as they've been put in place in Greater Manchester right now have worked in bringing the R number down. You're worried about tougher restrictions that are to come in a tiered system, so open things up and get things moving again.
Yeah, they've worked to a degree, and as I said, they should have gone further, in my view, so that we'd have had a bigger decrease and be able to face December with a lower number of cases.
Would you have closed schools?
The trend is that I said I would, yes. It should have been done over the half term to minimise the disruption. But still, I would have done that because schools here, Tom, are facing just perpetual disruption anyway because the case numbers have been high. So it's not true that schools here are fully open. Kids are being sent home all of the time. And actually, if you'd done a circuit break that included schools, I think you would have had less disruption to schools coming out of it.
How is your relationship with the Prime Minister?
Well, I don't know. I've said that I'm more than willing to work with him.
Have you spoken since the last time you sort of infamously came on the television to find out that the money that you'd been hoping to receive hadn't been received, which was then quickly reversed by the government? Have you spoken since then?
No. I have said I'm here to talk and would want to move things forward. I didn't seek confrontation or manufacture that whole situation. I was trying to work behind the scenes to get a fair deal. I was arguing, if you remember, Tom, for an 80% furlough for the people who work in pubs and bookmakers that are being closed. Eventually that was conceded. So some of what I said, the government accepted. So I think what we need to do is kind of move on from here. And what I would say, yes, there will need to be restrictions come next week. Keep them proportionate. Get rid of the curfew. Allow people to have a modest loosening. What I wouldn't do, and this is what the government sounds like it's about to do, is abandon everything over Christmas and then lock everything down again in January. I don't think that's going to work. I would say keep a steady approach through December and January, because otherwise it'll be too tough for people. And businesses won't be able to work with that. You know, when they're operating one day and then they're closed the next. It's too hard for them to plan for that.
Just before I let you go to crack on with your Sunday, very quick word on the internecine conflict within the Labour Party and whether or not it was fair to keep Jeremy Corbyn out of the PLP.
I mean, those are matters for the Westminster Party. They're not really matters for me.
Of course, but what do you think? You're a Labour big beast. What do you think?
Well, I looked at the process that they set up to decide the case, and I don't think it was independent enough. So I don't think the party has yet learned the lessons of the EHRC report, and they need to do it quickly. That should have been a more independent process set up by the NEC. So I'm not going to get involved in the ins and outs of it. I don't know all of the details, but they've got to implement the EHRC report. So I can see it's not for me. I don't know all of the details.
Understood. I just wondered if you had an opinion given your background.
Tom, if you don't mind, and this is what I came on the programme to talk about. It was really disappointing this morning that the Chancellor denied almost that there was any problem with people who've been excluded from public support. 3 million people out there. I know many of them are your listeners. Their hearts must have been sinking listening to the Chancellor this morning, almost denying that was a problem, suggesting that they were all quite well paid. Well, that isn't good enough. And I would want to put the call out today to MPs from all parties to challenge the government on this. We will not unite this country at the end of all of this if 3 million people have been left with nothing throughout and go into Christmas basically unable to buy presents for their kids or have a basic normal Christmas. So sorry to just throw that in at the end, Tom, but I think it's a really important message that we need to get out there.
Good to talk to you, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester. Matt is in Kingston before we end at 1. Hi there, Matt.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for letting me come on. Just listening to Andy Burnham there, it was fascinating. I also read that the test and trace system, one of the reasons that's failing is because people are refusing to take time off work because they just can't afford to. So maybe some proper incentivized system. So maybe a local approach, tougher restrictions, but give people a way to be able to quarantine for those who can't afford it.
Yes, and for when you're out of quarantine, do you think a card, a sort of card to wave at people?
I've got a card. I've just got my Freedom Pass, which means I'm a certain age. I can remember the AIDS epidemic when it first came out. I thought your question was excellent about this because in those days, AIDS primarily started at homosexual male population, as you know, and of course now as much is growing in the heterosexual population. But it was considered very discriminatory for people because there was talk about what would happen with people's insurance, their employment prospects, so all sorts of horror stories. And so I personally am comfortable with wearing some sort of a lanyard or something saying I've had a test. But I guess,
Matt, it would just be, sorry to interrupt, but I guess it would just be difficult to keep current. You have to be giving these things out all the time and would presumably only be in circulation for a day or two after you've had those 2 tests because you would need to keep having them. Listen, thank you for your call. Thank you so much for all your calls over the course of the programme. We're back with you Sunday morning, next Sunday at 10 a.m. and I'm back with you tomorrow night at 10 p.m. There's Global Player if you missed any of the programme. Of course, at 4, it's Ian Payne. Right now on LBC. Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Tom. Coming up, Sadiq Khan has said that COVID-19 has created a potential existential threat to central London because many people may in future choose to work in the suburbs rather than in the heart of the capital. But is that a bad thing? Before that, Lord Evans, the ex-head of MI5, who is now the chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, has said that there's a perception that some in our political leadership are disregarding norms when contraventions of ethical standards occur. And he says that nothing happens. As the Chancellor hasn't ruled out a public sector pay freeze, do we need a full inquiry into how decisions involving millions were made in public contracts? But first, Britain has faced restrictions for months on coronavirus, but latest analysis shows that the forecasts aren't real. Has national lockdown backfired?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play